This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast.
Oh, sorry, I have to bang the gavel again because I didn't have my microphone on. Can I welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Police and Crime Committee in the 2023-24 Assembly year. Now, this morning we are joined by representatives from the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime to discuss its work and oversight of the Metropolitan Police Service. Please can I ask everyone to make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions, and that also includes people in the audience. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Mo Emma, with Anne, Assembly Member Clark attending as a substitute, and we've also had apologies from Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? No? Now, I'm proposing that we take agenda items 3, 4 and 5 together. So can we note the membership and chairing arrangements, the terms of reference and the standing delegations of authority for the Police and Crime Committee as detailed on the agenda? Thank you. And can we confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 8th of March and the 23rd of March to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you very much. And can we note the completed, outstanding and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent? Excellent. And can we also note the recent actions taken by the former chairman under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members as listed in the agenda report? Thank you. And can we note the responses received to the committee's report on probation services in London as listed in the agenda report? And we now move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime on its work and its oversight of the Metropolitan Police. So I would like to welcome our guests from MOPAC, Diana Luchford, CB, who is the Chief Executive, and Kenny Bowie, who is the Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight. Now, just before we get started with our questions, I just want to thank Assembly Member Hall for her work chairing the committee over the last 18 months. Just this last fortnight has shown me how much work you were doing, Susan, on all our behalves, and I'm sure the whole committee will want to extend our gratitude to you for your work. And we don't always agree on policing, but we both care massively about it, and I look forward to working with you in your role as Deputy Chair as we carry out our serious task as a committee of scrutinising the Met and MOPAC at this very critical time for policing in London. Now, again, just before we get started on the questions, I just want to mention that the committee has received representations from people who were arrested during the coronation. Now, in 2 weeks' time, we have a Q&A with the Met and Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden, where we will actually look at the coronation policing. But I just want to insert one very brief question for MOPAC about the policing of the coronation for you, Diana. Do you have concerns about the numbers of people who were arrested at the coronation, held for many hours in a police cell and were subsequently released with no further action? It's just many Londoners have contacted Assembly members with concerns about civil liberties, and they'd like to know what, if any, review MOPAC is conducting in its oversight role on the policing of the coronation and its impact on the right to protest.
Thank you. So on that specific question, clearly the decisions that were taken about policing during the coronation were operational decisions, but you will be conscious that the Mayor has expressed concern and interest in the action that was taken, and indeed has written to the Commissioner about that, and that letter has been published, and the Commissioner replied. And in that letter, the Commissioner said that he would be undertaking a review of the decisions that were taken, and the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor are encouraging him to publish the findings of that review.
Do you have any sense of the process and timelines for that?
Well, I think the Mayor would like to receive that information as soon as possible, so I think we will be looking at weeks.
Thank you very much. I need to sort out the microphone. Assembly Member Hall.
Can I just for balance say I was so proud of the way the police actually dealt with the coronation. It was an incredible effort on their behalf and showed Britain up to be the great country it is, and I cannot heap enough praise upon the police for the way that they policed the coronation.
Yeah. Thank you, Assembly Member Hall. So, on to our main questions for today. The Casey Review repeated the findings of institutional racism that go back 30 years to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, along with entrenched homophobia and misogyny. Now, Dame Louise Casey set out that everyone involved in police scrutiny, including us AMs, need to assess the part we play in scrutinising the Metropolitan Police Service and ensuring that Casey's findings are addressed. Now, the Casey Review provides us with a very powerful roadmap, and we are agreed as a committee on focusing our work this year on following up progress on the Casey findings across a range of the Metropolitan Police work streams. So, Diana, my first question is, what is your assessment of MOPAC's current oversight capacity?
Thank you, Chair, and can I welcome you to your role, and can I also thank your Deputy for her contribution to the PCC over recent years, and also for your undoubted commitment and support for the Metropolitan Police, which of course you've just articulated. I look forward to working with the committee because, as you have said, we have got an enormous programme of work in respect of Met reform, and I think today we'll be discussing some of those challenges. So, and also, Chair, I know that you have written to me separately about how we can work together on your work programme going forward, so I'll reply to that in due course. In terms of your question about my assessment of our current oversight capacity, obviously we keep our oversight capacity under constant review. And clearly both the Met being placed in the Engage process and now the Casey report have caused further reflection. Now, my overall assessment is that MOPAC has made progress in enhancing our oversight capacity, but there are still constraints and there are some identified areas of risk which I'll come on to. So since I joined MOPAC, I've strengthened the oversight function. My initial restructure involved appointing a director for strategy and oversight, there he is, when the previous strategy function was a kind of ragbag of responsibilities, including private office, which I felt took the focus off the oversight function. So even before the Met was placed in Engage, we'd already recognised there was a need to review our approach. And in fact, the consultation on the Police and Crime Plan in 2021 told us that Londoners didn't understand how oversight was exercised, so it was really important that we took action on that. And Kenny has led much of the work to take action on that, to make coordination of our oversight more effective. He set up various internal systems to enable issues of concern to be effectively escalated from within the organisation, filtered up so to an oversight meeting where those issues are analysed and which we use to decide what the DMPC should focus on at bilateral meetings, and also in the oversight boards themselves, which we have split into two. We can say more about that if you like. That was all pre-Casey, but then with Casey on the horizon, we knew we'd need more resource to enable an effective response. So we've increased the resource by 7 people to help that. Also, we wanted to increase capacity of oversight around misconduct and complaints because of the increased interest in that over the last 12 months. And obviously, we knew we were going to have to respond to Casey, and Angiolini will be reporting soon also. But having said that, so as I say, I think a lot of progress has been made, but I would acknowledge that there are still areas where we need to strengthen our internal capability. One that I would focus on is oversight of major technology projects. So you'll be conscious that the Met is implementing 2 very big technology projects, Connect and Command and Control. I am concerned that we do not have the technological expertise that we need in MOPAC to provide the most effective oversight that we could on that. I mean, we obviously are doing the best we can. That's something we need to address. I'm also concerned actually about the workload on individuals, because while we've strengthened the capacity of our oversight function, those officers are also undertaking several other tasks at the same time, like answering mayors' questions. They're often sort of providing briefings and information for oversight forums and so on and so forth. And obviously, another risk that I'm contemplating at the moment is the London Policing Board, because that is also going to make further demands on MOPAC, and we need to make sure that we have the resources in place to support that. We have put in place a shared service agreement with the GLA, which is coming to Oversight Committee this afternoon about that. So we need to keep capacity under constant review, I think, is the answer.
A lot of the things that you've mentioned we will be picking up as we go through go through the meeting, but I'm very interested in what you said about the oversight of tech projects. Does that include facial recognition technology use of?
Well, we do have an officer in MOPAC who is actually very knowledgeable on live facial recognition and has done, really gets under the skin of that. So I'm less concerned about that than I am about the major technology projects come up, because there's so much public money going into those projects. And there have been delays in the implementation of them, which, you know, the Meta working through. But you know, I'm not a technology expert. It's quite a difficult skill to. There's a lot of demand in the market for those skills, basically, and it's kind of quite difficult for us to get the right people in to help on that.
Yeah. I wonder if we should maybe have a briefing on Connect and Command and Control.
Yeah, sure.
Those projects. That would be incredibly helpful.
You may want to ask the Met about that at the next session, but I mean, they are major delivery programs which are now lagging behind in terms of implementation.
Sorry?
And digital forensics as well, which is part of that, I think, as well, that whole bag. Yeah.
Indeed. Are you wanting to come in on this point? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, you've talked about capacity workload on individuals and needing more. How large do you think your staff team should be, considering it's grown by 123 members since 2016? What would you put as the figure on the size of your staff team?
Well, it's difficult to put a figure on it because, you know, you need to flex your resources according to your priorities. But I think what is important to say is that MOPAC is actually a small organisation. It's got about 290 staff. About 40 of them are in Violence Reduction Unit. About 25 to 30 of them are in DARA, who provide the audit and assurance function. The Met's got 44,000 officers and staff, so it's actually not, you know, it's quite disproportionate, the comparison. I explained this at a recent meeting with boroughs, actually, and I hope Councillor Ian Edwards doesn't mind me reflecting on the surprise. He was very, very surprised when I said that, which made me think that even those partners we work closely with actually don't understand the scale and therefore the capacity of MOPAC. So I wouldn't put a precise figure on the numbers, because that's quite arbitrary in a way. It's actually about having the right skills and expertise,
but you must
being able to flex those priorities. And the other thing is, obviously, we're constrained by how much money we've got.
Yeah, but you money aside, we'll come to that, I suppose, but you are making statements saying that you don't have capacity. You must have some idea of what you'd like that capacity to look like. And of course, your comparison to the size of the Met is false, because the Met has a significantly different function to you. You're not knocking on people's doors and chasing people down the road in the same way the Met are.
Of course.
So my point is, you know, percentage terms, is a 5% increase or is a 205% increase? Where do you see the size of MOPAC going?
Well, I mean, I would like to increase our capacity in order for us to, you know, I've described one area already. I think we could do more on financial oversight as well. So, you know, I would like a few more people doing that. You've always got to. you're kind of constrained by the resource that you've got, haven't you? So I mean, obviously, I could make MOPAC much bigger, but I've also got to be conscious of public money. So I'm not gonna put a figure on the number of people that I would like to have. But like, we could answer MQs quicker, we could answer correspondence quicker if we had more people. That is kind of self-evident, really. Did you want to add anything?
I mean, all I would say is I think there's sort of three elements to the capacity question, isn't there? There's one, what is the overall number that you need? And in all honesty, that's sort of how long's a piece of string, because it's all to do with prioritisation and what you decide you want to look at. I would say at the moment there is a level of scrutiny going on to the Met, which is probably unprecedented, and rightly so. That does probably mean that we may need to grow to deal with that. There's a secondary question for me, which is about how do I and others in the organisation make better use of the capacity that we actually already have. Some of that has been about the work that I've been trying to do. So, for example, the way it works, and Diana touched on this a little bit earlier, is there's a sort of shared repository where we put all of our insights which we get, whether that's from speaking to CPS and other partners, whether that's just from the work Evidence and Insights do. We have an oversight analysis meeting which feeds into an oversight coordination meeting, then we decide which meetings all of those things go to. We've tried to remove layers of clearance from my team so that you actually free up people in a thing, try to make sure that we're not duplicating at meetings. So there's lots of stuff which we can and are doing to try and increase capacity without actually just raising numbers, if I can put it that way. And then there's a third element which I would describe as how do you make better use of external resources in a way which doesn't actually require an uplift in headcount within MOPAC. So we are the only PCC where we annually commission HMIC FRS to do an inspection. We just had the first one of those back last month, which was to do with the sudden deaths and looking at the follow-up from the Stephen Port, where again, very useful that we did that because we had assurances from the Metropolitan Police under the previous regime that things had been considerably better. It turns out that that wasn't actually the case. We are just in the process of finalising our second annual commission, which should be public, that we're doing that fairly soon. There is how can we coordinate better with the other oversight bodies, where Diana has been doing a lot of work personally on a lot of that to make sure that we are getting more bang for our collective buck and making sure that what Casey talks about is not having the hard levers. That's undoubtedly true, but how can we do that together? So that is my sort of answer on the three elements as to how we're trying to look at the capacity side of things.
Okay,
Thank
Chair,
you.
back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, I understand Assemblymember Duval very briefly wants to come in.
Isn't capacity more than just physical resources? We could all do with more, and sometimes we get them and sometimes we don't. But isn't the issue of the Casey report about capacity was the capacity for MOPAC about how they use that resource in terms of their scrutiny over the Met's operations? Do you not accept that in terms of the issue? You know, are you a spectator in policing accountability, or are you a participant? Which I got from the Casey report, you're a bit of a bystanders and you're a bit of a pick and mix approach about when you intervened and when you didn't. So what's the capacity about style and engagement of the people that you're working to have oversight over? Is that not part of the capacity debate as well?
So I mean, I don't know whether I would call that capacity or style of approach. I totally recognise the question that you're asking. I think it's fair enough. I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a sort of bystander or a spectator in these things, if I'm honest with you. I think we have tried to take a different approach. It was very clear when I started that the Met wasn't particularly paying a lot of attention to the way in which MOPAC was trying to push forward its work. That's why I suggested, and we did introduce, the following oversight boards. We actually wrote public letters to the previous regime, and that we quoted the legislation requiring them to give us data, which was certainly a much more forward-leaning approach than had happened previously. It's why we do now have an oversight analysis meeting where we actually try to look at what are the key things, what's going well, what's not going well, and bring that up to strategic level and bring it to force level. It's why I split and recommended, and the Mayor and Sophie, the Deputy Mayor, agreed that we split the Oversight Board in two to make it a Performance and Risk Oversight Board, a Finance, Change and People Oversight Board, so that we had time to bring those together, so that when we look at the performance issues, if we identify them, you're then able to take that to Finance Board and look at how any of the budgeting is done on a priority basis. What's not is the answer. And that is something Mark and Lynn are looking at. So I totally accept that there's an approach thing which goes with the capacity thing. There's a question about transparency. Did the letters work? Obviously not well enough, hence the reason that we've reviewed that again. Casey said that we should have the London Policing Board, and the Mayor's announced that's going to happen. So there'll be continual sort of evolution and improvement. I'm never going to sit here and say everything I do or everything we do is perfect, because that's never the case. But I don't think I'm a bystander on any of this.
Okay, so Diana, so in terms of...
Len, this was going to be brief.
Well, okay.
Go on.
It needs to be said. It needs to be said at this meeting.
Yeah.
So, if we accept, which I think you're going to accept, that more of the same isn't working, that you're going to have to do things differently, what's gone wrong with some initial changes and approaches that I think Kenny has outlined that went there for Casey to write in the terms that she did, which wasn't very complimentary about MOPAC?
I think that what Louise Casey was very clear about was that the significant problem in the relationship was the way that the Met was very defensive, was not open, was not transparent, and was holding us at arm's length. And I would completely support Kenny in saying that we are in no way bystanders, and we have made substantial efforts. But there is a cultural defensiveness, or there was a cultural defensiveness within the Met, which manifests itself, for example, in issues like data sharing, which we might want to come on to later.
We will.
I think Louise described them as closed as a clam. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's not that we haven't been trying, and we have achieved many things actually, which I could set out for you. But I know Carolyn, the chair, wants to move on. But I do think that is the key. That was actually Louise's key finding. That was the defensiveness of the Met in their attitude towards MOPAC.
Thank you. Is that back to me now? Thank you. So that dysfunctionality of the relationship with the Met was the next thing I was going to be coming to anyway. And I just wonder what steps MOPAC is taking to fix that. So how are you trying to kind of make sure that relationship between the Met and MOPAC works well?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously the question that we have ourselves been reflecting on, what needs to change, because the issues that we're addressing are deep-rooted. They stretch back decades in terms of the defensiveness of the relationship between MOPAC and the Met, or the Met and MOPAC, I should say. And they've happened under several different systems. So, this is not a recent development. This is culturally embedded. And as I've just said, Casey's report made that clear, that while the Met have been defensive and evasive. So we're reflecting on that very, very carefully. And I mean, I think it is worth saying that at a personal level, many of the relationships are very good and very positive, including at a kind of leadership level, but also particularly further down the organisation, if I can use that description. We have many good working relationships between officers and commanders and other colleagues in the Met. But MOPAC can't be defensive. That was one of, obviously, we look at the way that Baroness Casey criticised the Met, and we need to take the learning from that ourselves. We need to reflect on what we need to do differently. So we have, I think it's fair to say, agreed with Mark and Lynn right back at the beginning that when they were appointed, that we would set a new tone and we would work together as collaboratively as possible. And we are already seeing evidence of that. We have held multiple meetings with the Met on the turnaround plan, which we'll probably come back to in more detail later. They have been very receptive to our suggestions. They are taking our... We are trying to offer them as much support as possible, particularly with kind of engagement with Londoners. We are drawing in a broader coalition from across City Hall to support that. So it's not just a MOPAC thing. We've also been working with Debbie Weeks-Bernard and other parts of the GLA to support them. And we are seeing incremental improvements, for example, in relation to requests for data sharing. But I mean, I still think, obviously, the main finding of the Casey report was around the culture of the Met. And the challenge that the senior leadership have got, even though I completely I absolutely am convinced by the genuineness of their intention, is that needs to cascade all the way down and through the organisation. And that is not going to be quick. Because there is a kind of cultural resistance to oversight. And it's kind of, you know, in some ways it's understandable. I mean, nobody likes having people breathing down their neck the whole time. And some of the, even though, of course, they recognise our kind of statutory duties, and there are ways that we need to make our interactions with them smoother. So it's fair enough for the Met to say, you've got multiple different officers asking us for the same information, or you're asking about the same topics in a range of different places. So you're doing it in Oversight Board, you're doing it in bilats, the Mayor's doing it in bilats, you know, you're duplicating basically. So we need to look at what we're doing as well and streamline our interactions with the Met. But the cultural defensiveness is going to take longer to break down, no matter what the kind of objectives and are of the senior leadership, I think.
And so do you think that cultural defensiveness is kind of within that they are still dealing with that cultural defensiveness, that not all Met officers have kind of taken on board the Casey findings and are still resisting?
Well, if I can just unpick that a bit, I mean, I'm not saying that the Met as a whole hasn't taken on the Casey findings. What I'm saying is we're trying to turn an oil tank around, and it's a cliche, but, you know, when you've got people that have worked in a certain way for multiple years, being asked to change their ways of working takes more than just being told. So, you know, the senior leadership messages are there, but that needs to cascade through every layer of the organisation, and supervision is a really, really big part of that, so that, you know, we can, the leaders of the Met can be satisfied that cultural change is happening. But you know, it's not going to be quick, and that's not just in respect of their relationship with MOPAC. You know, obviously that's the bit that you're asking about, but it's also about the broader and, you know, much more concerning findings around institutional racism, misogyny, homophobia, and the rest of it. So that's the cultural bit that they really need to challenge, and of course they are.
Yep. One of the things you mentioned just earlier was, in passing, was about data. And you will know that I received this week an answer to a Mayor's question that I submitted last July about the locations of strip searches, or more thorough searches with intimate parts exposed, of children. Now, 10 months on, the Met couldn't even provide the location of a fifth of those strips that took place, those searches, and they've revised the number of children searched like this in 2021 upwards from 99 to 271. That's nearly 3 times as many children. Now, the data hadn't been recorded properly, and that led to, given in the answer, 72 hours of officer time spent extracting an answer and almost a year of delay to provide it. Now, the Commissioner told me that he felt the power of strip search had been overused and misused. So it's really important that there is good data collected and stored about the use of that very invasive power. Now, each of those searches judges represents a child traumatised by a very invasive interaction with the Met. Now, do you think this case is an outlier, or in your view, are the Met's data systems simply unfit for purpose?
So I think there's a number of things there. So I think one, their data systems do need to be improved. There's some basic changes. For example, Connect is going to bring 7 systems into one, but at the moment it's too easy for officers not to complete a field and you to be able to carry on, rather than, I mean, when did this technology come in? About the 1500s, a drop down where you actually just have to go and do some stuff like that. I mean, I was pretty horrified, I have to confess, when I saw the answer to that MQ. I did say we need to go back and say we need to be making sure that there actually is a drop down or something which requires them to record the location of this sort of stuff. But data quality is an issue across the board in, I mean, not just the Met, to be fair, but across policing, many other organisations as well as a whole. There does need to be a sort of, I suppose, a two-pronged approach to it. One, where people understand why data quality is actually genuinely important, but 2, just practical steps like drop-downs or not being able to move on before certain fields are completed, which are put in place to try and make simple steps towards improving that. There is, I mean, just on the specifics of MTIPS and strip search, you'll know that now they do produce dashboards on this, which is something that we in MOPAC were pushing for them to do, which are now public, and we're hopefully that does mean that there is an imperative for them to get that data right, because it is public, it is updated on a quarterly basis, I believe, and which will actually show. And I think that's about the power of transparency and openness of data, which again is a theme which Louise Casey picks up in her report, because the more data that's out there and the more they're required to produce that regularly, I think that just adds to the sort of ability of Londoners as a whole to be able to hold them to account for what's happening with the power and ask the questions, and hopefully it forces the Met and us as MOPAC, when they are putting that together, to ask those same questions.
It also, you know, if the data is recorded properly, it means the Met can see how much they are using a power that the Commissioner has said had been overused and misused. And
it is down about, I think it's down 64% roughly.
Yes, and that's very welcome, but it is very, very important in terms of trust and confidence that people feel that data is being collected properly.
I agree entirely.
Is there anything else that MOPAC is working on with the Met to improve the collection and handling of data?
Well, there's lots of work that we're doing around at the moment around with the Met for them to publish dashboards related to complaints and misconduct, where I think we would all agree that is a big area of focus, both just in terms of the interim Casey report, but more generally in terms of what the Commissioner talks about high standards and rooting out the officers that are damaging the integrity of the police service. We're doing that. We are working, we have a place on their data board where we do lots of work with them, both in a kind of trying to be supportive and make constructive suggestions, but also in a hold them to account way, where we look at all of the work that they're doing on data, look at that. And at the moment we are also working with them on their sort of open data strategy, and I was discussing this with Darren Skates 2 weeks ago. I don't want to lie, maybe in the last month I've discussed that with Darren Skates about how all of the data, and they put a hell of a lot of data, to be fair, on the London data store, whether there is stuff that we can jointly push for some sort of search function to sit over the top of that, to make it again more accessible for Londoners in terms of all of the data that does go on there. So we are doing a lot. I mean, I took over our evidence and insights team initially on a sort of temporary basis, I think last February, and since then the access to data with the Met and the data which goes out from the Met and from us, it's been one of the things I've really worked on, and I would say we have seen a noticeable change in the Met's approach to all of that in the last 4 or 5 months, both in terms of our ability to get to stuff and the approach that they're taking to what's going out and what they're willing to share more openly.
Thank you.
Can I just add something, Chair?
Yes, please.
I mean, my relief at seeing that your MQ had finally been answered was immediately tempered by seeing that the data had changed. So I'm very sort of conscious of that. But I just wanted to add that you'll be aware that the Met outsourced a lot of its transactional functions as a result of austerity and a decision to kind of prioritise officers at the time of the BCU structure. So that took a lot of analytical resource out of BCUs. And it's one of the areas for, MOPAC has been very much encouraging the Met across a range of issues to bring more external expertise in, and it's another thing that Casey has identified, of course. But analysts are one of the sort of cohorts of people that we think they need to bring more expertise in on.
Thank you. That's really useful. We'll pick that up because we are definitely looking at BCUs and local policing and the lack of that analytical resource. We'll make sure that we pick that up when we get to that. Assembly Member Duval, can I bring you in?
Thank you very much. Just to tidy off that section. Microphone. So can you just tell us about your thinking about where Casey describes MOPAC's approach as that you somehow don't quite get tactical oversight rather than strategic oversight and those issues. So currently, what's your thinking about that as you review the Casey report?
So I think we've already described that we're keeping our oversight structure under review, and we've taken that criticism around sort of the tactical versus the strategic. I described some of the internal mechanisms that we're using, including sort of taking a thematic approach to our oversight boards, which have been split in two. So we've got one on finance, change and people. We've got one on performance and risk to make sure that we've got sufficient time for the important discussions we have. And we theme those so that they're more explicitly linked to the 4 PCP priorities and bring sort of greater focus to key topics such as trust and confidence. So that's one of the ways that we're being more strategic. But I think I'd just like to mention to the committee also that one of Casey's findings was that the oversight agencies, bodies, collectively do not have the levers required to create the types of changes that other parts of the public sector have arrangements for. So like Ofsted, for example, has many more powers. So my view was that we needed to work more strategically and more collaboratively with the other oversight bodies, so like IOPC, HMIC, FRS, and the College of Policing, who we meet kind of bilaterally, and we see each other regularly in lots of Met forums, but we never actually come together as a group, and I think we might be missing a trick there. So I wrote to the oversight bodies post-Casey, and we came together last week for a first meeting to make sure we're kind of harnessing all the knowledge collectively from the oversight bodies when we, for example, commission HMIC thematic reports or whatever it might be, and discussing what our shared priorities are, including cultural change, and how we can become more than the sum of our parts. Now, this work is in its early stages because we've only had one meeting, but I think it could, but we intend to have more, and I think that could really lift the kind of strategic approach if we're working better as a group of oversight agencies rather than just as individuals.
And does that answer imply that you're looking at your levers that you do have in terms of using those with your, I don't know, strategy of tough love with the MPS? Are you looking and reviewing those levers?
So, I mean,
what you have in terms of oversight of the MPS and what you can do if you're not satisfied with their performance?
The Mayor has asked us to look at our accountability mechanisms. I don't know if there's anything more you want to add on that, but something we're thinking about.
I think this is the work that part of my team's doing at the moment, looking at what are and what should be the structures under the London Policing Board and how And then combined with that, what are the mechanisms which can be used to actually help hold the Met to account? I mean, I would say there's a range of sort of views in this, because without hard and fast legislative change, there are no direct hard levers. I think the London Policing Board is a pretty hard lever in that the Mayor's made it clear it's going to be held in public. We have gone out to recruitment. We're looking to bring in up to 9 people with a range of backgrounds and genuine professional.
I think we're going to go into that later on, but thank you for that as a preemptor, and that will tee up my colleagues around that. On the in terms of what ways will MOPAC adapt the London Police and Crime Plan in light of the Casey review, and what's your timescales for that? And at the same time, can you just ask, just for clarity, between your existing accountability measures and the new board, if you think about that, when we come to the new board, maybe you'll tell us how we're going to not avoid duplication, but how they work together in driving the change that we decide, which isn't just about cultural, it is about the performance of the MPS. We shouldn't forget about that. We're not exactly running away in the performance stakes, are we, in the MPS?
There's quite a lot in that question. I'll try my best to be brief, which isn't necessarily my greatest quality, but
no me.
So on the police and crime plan, at the moment, there is obviously it can be revised during the year. There's a requirement to go out to consult and do lots of work. I think at the moment the priority is making sure that the London Policing Board gets set up, that we respond to Casey in the proper way, and that we do all of the work necessary in terms of the evidence gathering and the thinking about stuff to make sure that the next police and crime plan can be produced following the next election in the swiftest way possible. I look at what Casey has said, I look at what is in our police and crime plan. Do I think that the priorities of violence, including VOG, trust and confidence, how victims are treated and how we protect people from criminal harm and exploitation are entirely wrong? No, I don't. Do I think that the underpinnings of how you have a good police service and how you change the entire culture of that probably would be strengthened if we were to be redrafting that today? Yes, I absolutely do, and I accept that. But I think at the moment, in terms of, if I go back to the previous questions about the capacity of MOPAC to do stuff, I would rather that capacity was focused on helping the Met with its reform and setting up the levers that are needed for that. Brilliant observation about the 2-hour performance metrics and the Met's performance metrics, and those of the new London Policing Board and what Casey says all come together. Something which my team is leading on jointly with the new performance function which has been set up in the Met, so that actually what we can do when this comes up for the London Policing Board, because we will need to not, I mean, what gets lost a little bit, then there's a discussion about the turnaround plan and it just being the response to Casey. It's obviously not just the response to Casey. This came about primarily because the Met are in the engage phase of HMI CFRS, so it needs to deal with all of the issues identified under HMI CFRS. It needs to identify everything to do with Casey, and it also needs to sort of keep flying the plane whilst they rebuild it at the same time. So absolutely we need to come up with a performance framework which takes from everything that there is and is going to be something which I can say stands the test of time over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and is something that not only we recognise, that Londoners recognise, but that the Met will also recognise, so that they don't hold that at arm's length but are as invested in that as we are.
Okay. Given that I think we've alluded, look, you're telling us there's some green shoots here developing and we can see some changes already occurring in the relationship and the development of plans. The issue that Casey found was that the MPS didn't really take, let's take an example like the Durham, the internal audit risk issues and their attitude towards being presented with evidence-based material and equally dismissing that. the trouble is that problem, as Diana said, along with many, has been going on for years now. Has that changed? Has that changed now? Can you tell the committee that no longer happens and there's a different sort of phoenix from the flames coming from the MPS about some of those issues? Because it seems to me a quick win for MOPAC in this relationship with the MPS.
So, I mean, we are seeing green shoots, and we welcome those, and we hope that, you know, they're going to bloom. In particular, there's been some strides on data sharing, I would say. The tension with regard to data sharing was predominantly around targeted research analytics, with a particular example around body-worn video research, where we have been trying to obtain information about that for a number of years. And we've recently held really constructive sessions on that and have been encouraged by the response. We've now actually only got 3 outstanding long-term data requests with the Met, which is positive. On DARA, I mean, I would characterise the situation there as a kind of microcosm of the cultural resistance that exists, actually. It's a sort of prime example of where DARA findings have not been taken seriously, and actually, more importantly, because they haven't been taken seriously, it's resulted in strategic issues. Because individual recommendations or whatever have not been acted upon, that has resulted in strategic issues being missed. Now, it's a bit soon to say whether that is changing, but there are some things that are happening which I hope will impact that. So, I mean, I've personally reinforced with the Deputy Commissioner the importance of taking the DARA work seriously, which she absolutely acknowledges. I also was determined that she should be involved in the appointment of the new audit panel chair, because the audit panel, the joint audit panel, has actually been relentless in kind of pressing the Met to respond more promptly to recommendations. But I mean, I think I wouldn't be, I think the outgoing chair was extremely frustrated by the resistance that the audit panel encountered, particularly around issues like just continuity of people dealing with particular issues and the same person turning up to audit panel meetings over a period of time so that the audit panel could assess progress. Because if you're always sort of going back to square one with somebody, it's not kind of easy. So I know that she was really, really frustrated about that. She and the audit panel members did their very best, but we have an opportunity now to reset with the new audit panel chair. So I wanted to kind of buy the Deputy Commissioner into who that person was, feel that that was somebody that she could work with. We have now appointed Jane Scott, and with, as I say, the Deputy Commissioner was on the panel. And Jane is looking into a kind of thinking about establishing a new framework for the audit panel to support the reform of the Met, but also to enable a sort of really effective challenge. So I think, yeah, there is progress being made, but Rome wasn't built in a day. And, you know, I just don't think we can pretend in respect of anything that we're discussing today that this is going to be quick. And actually, it shouldn't be quick. The Met have got to take the time to get this right, because you know, the Casey report found many things that the Macpherson report found, which, you know, you can even go back to the Scarman report. Some of the themes are the same. So it's been decades. It's not going to be resolved in a week. But we are seeing green shoots. Kenny sits on the Risk and Assurance Board, so I don't know whether you want to add anything.
I mean, all I'd point out is that it's not a case of in this MOPAC, in the Met not listening to MOPAC with DARA, because whilst DARA are hosted in MOPAC, they are actually the Met's own internal audit as well. So I do think it's very, very important. And having sat in the Risk and Assurance Board previously, I did see examples where when reports were being presented, actually we got into various debates about what different levels of assurance meant, rather than just simply accepting what level had been given and talking about the substance. And then the themes which came out actually continually, and I don't think they'll object to me saying this, was one about how the Met actually governs itself and manages itself across the piece. And all I would say is that I know that Mark and the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner have been actively looking at their new governance structure, so I hope that is, as Dennis says, a green shoot in response to what they've heard from some of the reports from Dara.
Chair, there is a role for this committee to help, I think, and support you in the internal audit work and making sure that we receive some of those issues. The reason why I say it is because it is based on evidence-based work. I think there is an issue of where internally, where organisations' operational meets financial controls and issues of where what's the hierarchy and what drives change. If we can't get the basics right and be satisfied with that, then what hope have we got about some of the other aspects that we're working on? And I do accept that some issues will take time or will be continuous, but actually there should be some quick wins here if the MPS is saying what they're saying. Chair, I've got one final question, which is about transparency. So tell us about MOPAC and some of the issues, and I think you allude to in your contributions around your own transparency of oversight. For example, making more information available about the oversight boards. So tell us, can you share your thinking with the committee around that issue?
I think we have done a lot actually to increase our transparency, and the MOPAC website has been, I would like to say, revolutionised. I think is
noticed.
Yes, and let's just be. Maybe I should just say that it seems like it's an easy thing to do to put information on a website, and I absolutely recognise the kind of the need for the scrutiny that you do to be based on information that we provide. And we've discussed the fact that minutes and agendas of our oversight boards and the LCRB sub boards as well have been behind the curve, and I've taken steps to address that, as I hope you will have observed. But it's actually not that simple, because there's quite a lot of rules around kind of accessibility of information on websites. Which means they have to be formatted in a particular way, which takes a lot of officer time. You need people with training, you need Adobe licenses in order for those people. I mean, believe me, it is actually quite complicated. It's much more complicated to put something on a website than you might think. So I'm not making excuses, but there are reasons. And as I say, these people that are doing that are also doing the oversight of the Met. They're answering MQs, so we do all we can. We've also done a lot to increase transparency for Londoners as well. That's the other key thing. So our data dashboards, which I hope you've also seen on the website, have been redesigned and are much more accessible. And that was one of our key objectives, actually, over the past year, was to increase that transparency so that Londoners have got a better, can have a better understanding of the work we're doing. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I mean, I think we're coming on to London Policing Board later, but obviously that's going to be held in public, which is a big change.
Yeah, we are coming on to that later.
I'm sure you are.
In the spirit of that transparency, so you've recently had the Finance Change and People Oversight Board held in March, and where you did discuss the Casey and turnaround plans were discussed. Now, of course, there are some conversations that should remain confidential, but of course, the inference should be that more of it should be shared out in an open and transparent way. So can you give us an insight of what those conversations looked like at that meeting that took place in March?
Well, I think at the meeting in March, what we were doing was looking at the progress that the Met had made on revising the turnaround plan in the light of Casey. And that is work in progress, because obviously they are doing a big engagement process on that, which actually we probably should talk about as well. They've identified various areas where they need to strengthen the turnaround plan. We've identified areas. You've identified areas. So I think that is what we were focusing on there. So there's something there about, you know, showing the workings, if you see what I mean. It's more about when we get to the point where the turnaround plan is finally agreed and published.
Just interrupt. We are coming to the turnaround plan later, Len. So I think we should possibly leave it so that people...
Can I just seek some clarity about... look, there's something in me that says, look, you got off lightly on the Casey review. You're not being reviewed. You've not reviewed your organisation, but you tell me there are elements that you're reviewing yourselves. Now, Diana, when you first arrived as CEO, you introduced a review, and you did a review there. Do you not think that you should be offering yourself up for that review and some external look at yourself, not us doing it? I'm not making a pitch for this committee to do that, but do you not think that you should be doing that, given that all levels, we in ourselves here in this committee have decided to look at this year's work, and we'll be looking at how we interact with you and yourselves. But, you know, Casey didn't say that you needed to review yourself, but it's almost crying out for it as you read the report. What did you think about that, and why did you not come to that view?
Well, I mean, I think I've described the ways in which we have been internally reflecting, and we do continue to do that. But to be completely candid with you, I've kind of described the pressure that the organisation is experiencing in terms of delivering helping the Met to reform. I would be reluctant to distract the whole organisation with a full-scale review. Whether that was being done by an external body or whether that was being done internally. If it was being done by an external body, there would be, you know, legitimate demands for papers and interviews and all of this sort of thing, and that takes up masses of time. And actually, you know, ultimately, would it be worth it? It might be, and you know, it's really for other people to say whether they think or they would wish to externally review us. Internally, we are reflecting all the time, and I think that I have described the ways that we are doing that. But I don't want to disrupt an organisation which I want to be motivated to focus on the core issues for London by conducting an internal review, which I think people would find potentially threatening. You know, it's really important. The well-being of the staff in MOPAC is a major contributor to delivery, to be honest. So I am not minded at this point to undertake a review.
Okay, thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Chair. Now I'm going to bring in Susan Hall briefly on this first section. We do need to pick up the pace, members, massively, and then we'll be moving on to talk about Engage.
So I'm just going to very quickly say this. I understand you're trying to manage expectations, but with the Met and how long it's going to take. And as you know, I'm very supportive of the Met, but we have got to get trust and confidence back up in our police as a matter of absolute urgency. We're all very, very disappointed that as the major overseeing body on nearly, I think, £100 million cost, we haven't picked up some of these things before. I'm going to leave it there for time's sake, but we must get hits along the way that show that the Met are improving, and as quickly as possible. We can't keep saying it's going to take forever, because quite frankly the trust and confidence is vital for every one of us going forward. I'll leave it there.
Just to say, we absolutely agree with you in terms of getting trust and confidence being absolutely vital. We also agree that we need to have some quick wins, which I think were referred to before. And I mean, I do think that frontline policing is the area where, you know, best ever neighbourhood policing is the mantra that the Met have, and that is where they're going to need to demonstrate progress. There are kind of review points in the Casey review, as you know, a 2-year review point, a 5-year review point, and we will want to be able to see real change there. And one of the measures of that will be the impact on trust and confidence.
Thank you. I think we can all agree that the importance of trust and confidence is absolutely essential for effective policing. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Bailey to take our next questions.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, I have a slight additional. I just want to pick up where my colleague, Assembly Member Duval, left off. I believe MOPAC does need some kind of outside scrutiny. I really do. And when you talk about the safety of Londoners, which is even above the morale of your staff, except for you, that's a very important thing. I'm disappointed that won't happen because, of course, you overlook nearly 100 million in income, and many of the things that are wrong with the Met are decades old and weren't pointed out by you, and certainly not vociferously enough. When I say you, I mean organisation. So actually, I think that would go a long way to aid us in solving some of the problems that MOPAC have. Too much of conversation this morning has been about the Met. This is about you and your organisation, not the Met, at least in my head. And with that in mind, I want to start by asking, are you confident that MOPAC is ensuring effective oversight of the Met's response to the FRS engaged process, and what evidence do you have to support this?
I am satisfied that we are overseeing the Met's response to engage, but I think we shouldn't see that as kind of divisible from the broader reform that the Met needs to do. So the response to Casey, the turnaround plan, getting out of engage, they're basically, you know, they're all part of the same problem. So the oversight arrangements that I've described in terms of our oversight boards are where we scrutinise the Met's progress in delivering the transformation which will be needed to get out of engage. But that will also contribute to the kind of thematic objectives of the turnaround plan in terms of better support for victims, better frontline policing, and a range of other issues. So, for example, at our Oversight Board in April, we raised the issue of the quality of service that victims receive from the Met after reporting a crime, and those aren't they're not the only forum in which we hold them to account in relation to engage. We also do so through the regular bilateral meetings, and of course the ultimate responsibility for monitoring the Met's progress on engage lies with HMIC FRS, who conduct meetings that are called PPOG, Policing Oversight Group, Police Performance Oversight Group, which the Mayor, the Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor go to regularly. So there are various ways that we are supporting the Met to exit engage as soon as possible.
Can I ask you a much more simple question? What will you do differently if that process is going awry as far as you can see? Because the comment has been made this morning about being a passenger observer, and I for me that rings alarm bells, because it seems there's some truth in that. What will you do differently? How do the public sit at home and think, okay, the Met are in special measures, MOPAC are aiding them in that process, what are MOPAC going to do differently? Because of course the Met arrived in special measures with your supervision, so your supervision to a bystander mightn't be worth that much unless you can demonstrate something different's going to happen.
Well, obviously we've provided investment in a number of the areas to kind of, for example, improve Met CC, and we're actually satisfied with the progress that's being made across that issue. I mean, the percentage of 999 calls being answered has gone up. For example, we've seen sanction detections go up. So, I mean, we are seeing progress, and we will keep that under review, and we will continue to scrutinise and support and challenge. And one of the ways that we will do that is by continuing to encourage them to bring in external expertise in the areas which are deficient, because, you know, this is something Casey picked up on, and it's something that we continue to have concerns about, that they might benefit from other organisations that have been successful in doing particular things, providing that knowledge and learning to the Met. So that is something that I think, you know, we do want to do differently, and we want to see bear fruit
Have you suggested this to the Met?
Regularly.
Have you told them who they could be using as an outside support?
Well, we've certainly suggested in terms of workforce planning that they talk to the Army, for example. So yes, we have done that in practical terms, and it's one of the things that we do regularly at the turnaround board. But obviously, you know, we want to support the Met to get out of Engage, and as I say, we've done that through investment. But we also need to make sure that we challenge as well, and we will keep that under review. Is there anything you want to add? Because you're quite close to the
Kenny, before you answer, the question, excuse me, is what will you do differently? It's very easy to sit here and give warm words, and I'm not a fan of the warm words, because the warm words got us to this position. What will you do differently, and what will you do if encouragement isn't enough?
So what we are doing, not just what we will do, so what we're currently doing, for example, is I recently chaired 3 workshops with the Met in terms of their turnaround plan, where it was at ACC level, and we looked at culture and standards, we looked at VOG and children, and then we looked at strongest ever neighbourhood policing to bring together people from VRU, City Hall, us and the Met to actually start looking at what we thought needed to be changed. The Met, to be fair, very receptive to that. We then followed that back up with a seminar with the Met, a direct one that had sort of Deputy Mayor and the Commissioner and others there, and we'll be doing other stuff. We're doing lots around that. We are looking at how, through evidence and insights, we can make sure that the work plan which is developed is now done in a much more joint way with the Met, because one of the historical problems has been that the Met hasn't been open to receiving what we've found in MOPAC, so we are now taking very actively a different way to make sure that...
Sorry to interrupt you, Kenny, that's my point entirely. We fully know and accept that the Met haven't been the most welcoming partners, but what will you do?
That's just what I'm explaining to you, sorry.
And I'd like to hear from Diane as well. What are you going to do when they don't, let me rephrase it, if encouragement isn't enough? That's what I really want to know.
Well, I start as an optimist that they will.
Okay.
But if they don't, I think there's, one, that I'm open to suggestions in this. The Mayor has made it clear to the Commissioner that there'll be times when he needs to speak out about things when he sees things going wrongly. We have the opportunity of writing public letters, but again, as Louise Casey found, we don't have hard levers. We have tried all sorts of different approaches in the past. I think it will depend very much on the circumstances what approach we would take. I know you'll think that's me not giving you an answer to it, but I find it difficult sort of sitting here and having reflected on this quite a lot to see exactly what other options are directly available in that way.
I think it's quite difficult to say what we would do differently until we know what the actual problem is that we need to tackle. I think we're using the levers that we've got available, and in particular, I think one of the valuable things that we've done is that we've reached out to other PCCs who've been through the Engage process with their own force area to see what we can learn in terms of our kind of oversight of the Met. What's the learning from those forces, and that's actually been really informative. And I think, you know, we need to, as MOPAC as an organisation, needs to be open to a broader range of evidence, not just nationally, but internationally if necessary. Because some of the success factors, like from Greater Manchester Police, there's a particular one about being sure that you focus on the root causes of what the problems are, as a result of which the Met have done a root cause analysis now on the back of Casey, which is contributing to the turnaround plan, and sort of being realistic about how long it's going to take to get out of Engage, recognising that the right leadership, top to bottom, and the right supervision is absolutely key. These are some of the findings that Greater Manchester have, and I think that's valuable learning for us. So, as you know, something we do need to do differently is to learn more from where there's been success in other places.
I'm going to move on because I can feel the chair. What?
She got very long arms.
Yeah, because I say that because I'm a little bit dissatisfied with the answers, because I feel like you have a history with the Met. The Met have their problems, fine, they're being dealt with or not, and I don't sense much of a change in you as an organisation to deal with your internal problems and your interface with the Met.
I think that's unjustified, actually.
Well,
and I think I've given you... but if you have suggestions as to how we should do things differently, I am genuinely open to them. And it is the function of the committee, you know, to one of your terms of reference is to work in support of MOPAC, which of course you do, which is why I am genuinely very interested if you have other suggestions. This is part of me taking learning, so please.
Oh, please, the suggestions will come. This is
well,
not
no, please. I mean, you know.
Well, just if we're talking about culture, you have to have a culture where you will face the Met a bit more and not be so accepting when they don't give you what you want.
We have not been accepting.
Well, your history and the fact that we're at this point would suggest
Assemblymember
otherwise.
Bailey, I think you're making quite a lot of assertions here.
I'm being told things, so I'm just responding to those things. Let me move on to the next question, but I really want people to know that's where I stand. What progress has been made by the Met under the engage process, and when do you expect them to come out of enhanced monitoring? Do you have any sort of...
So I have described some of the progress that has been made, including increasing the percentage of 999 calls that are answered in under 10 seconds. That's gone from 57% to 70% in the past 9 months. So that's a really valuable service to Londoners and to victims. There's been an increase in the sanction detection rate for rape. It is still very low. So, you know, I'm not trumpeting this too much, but it has gone from 4.2% to 7%. So that is moving in the right direction. And obviously the Met has launched the new anti-corruption the new Anti-Abuse and Corruption Command. It's launched this anonymous hotline. There's been a 95% increase in misconduct cases completed. So there are various ways in which the Met is demonstrating progress, and we welcome those. In terms of when the Met comes out of Engage, well, I don't want to predict that, partly because it's the decision of HMIC FRS, but because, you know, it would be dangerous to then be held to that later.
I accept that you can't say no 12th of November.
Yeah.
I accept that. It
would be legitimate in terms of the 2-year review point, which Casey identified as being, you know, an opportunity for us to see what progress has been made. It would be legitimate for the Met exiting Engage to be seen as a measure of success at that point. Okay, but I'm not saying that that is what I expect to happen. I'm not being predictive, but I think that would be fair.
I accept that you do want to give your answer is fine on that. Can I just ask a very simple question? Who in your organisation is leading on the Engage work?
My friend here.
Have you asked HMIC-FRH?
We just call them HMIC.
There you go. How could they better hold the Met to account? Have you asked that direct question?
Yes.
And what did they say?
So we've done a lot of work with with all of HMIC, FRS, with the college, with others, looking at how we can all do this work. I mean, actually it was Sophie Linden and the Mayor have directly spoken to Andy Cook, who is the HMICI, about how all of this works, and we are now moving towards all of this. So it is about what's been said about lifting up strategic, making sure that they look at the root cause analysis, that we actually focus on the stuff rather than just ticking off the measures, that we're focusing on the stuff which is going to make long-lasting change, which is obviously a very different approach, staying on top of things and making sure that when new reports or new things come in, that they get embedded into the existing work rather than being seen as a separate bit of work, so that it gets all embedded across the piece. And then we will be bringing in the London Policing Board, which obviously will help us to do all of that. But that's the broadly speaking, what we've been told.
Has MOPAC learned anything from its engagement with the Engage process that can better inform your own analysis, your own scrutiny of the Met?
So, I mean, we went up and spoke to Manchester about, they were obviously in there, they were considered having done extremely well to get out of the Engage process after just 2 years, which is seen as very good, I should say. So that if you're looking for a sort of barometer, that's a barometer for you.
Thank you.
They spoke to us about a couple of things which has really helped us to inform. So when they were looking at their command and control and their sort of answering systems, they actually talked to us about the need to overstaff in those areas for the Met, and so that they could actually maintain the service whilst they were transforming the service, which again is very useful to us, because otherwise you may just look at stuff and not understand why X, Y and Z is happening. Another thing they said to us was about the need not just to focus on the immediacy of a problem, so not just the build of it, but also the run, so i.e. where's the sustainability and what's coming through. I mean, that's something which we knew as well, but they did say to us that that was one of what they had seen as being the key things for when HMICFRS were looking at their oversight, that they thought was helpful in helping them to exit the Engage phase. So yeah, we have done that.
And I go back to my question about resource. We've had a lot of conversation, isn't just about money, but again, nearly 100 million in public money. Do you have a plan that will increase your effectiveness and where you put that resource in moving the Met forward? Do you, as a lead on this?
Yeah, well, this is going to sound very public servant, but I have a sort of plan for a plan, because this will depend, because the way that the Met is planning to get out of Engage, their roadmap to this is the turnaround plan. So at the moment we have a work programme which is helping to oversee the development of that. Once the turnaround plan is set and where they move the headings and how different stuff goes on with that, we will then align our oversight with that. So at the moment we have leads on each of what's called their mandates, which is they're sort of a mixture of a sort of a project initiation document and some action plans and stuff which they use to run their programmes. We have leads on each of them who then come together and feed into it. But yes, there is a plan. I'm very happy to talk to you separately and take you through stuff in more detail.
Yeah, we'll have to do that separately because the chair is beginning to fidget now. Okay, back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to briefly bring in Assembly Member Clark.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to come back a bit on victim satisfaction, because that was obviously part of the HMIC report. And according to your most recent quarterly report, it seems that overall victim satisfaction is at a quote historic low, which is clearly not a good place to be. But it's particularly bad with telephone and online reporting. I'm just wondering if you could update the committee on how MOPAC is overseeing the MPS in this area and what improvements?
Yeah, so I mean, for example, one of the things which, sorry, I was coming across very loud. One of the things which was done previously with MOPAC support was a randomised control trial over callbacks within the TDI unit, which actually saw victim satisfaction in the areas that was done uplifted by something ridiculous like 45 percentage points as a whole. We then pushed for that to be implemented within the Met, which they said that it was done. We then, it was one of the big things that we thought would make a difference in this area. That was then brought in. We then waited until the second quarter. We reviewed performance. We saw that it wasn't actually, and it hadn't led to an increase. We then sent in our evidence insights team that had helped run the programme to look at exactly why that was the case. It turns out that the sort of programme fidelity, which is a fancy way of saying implementation, the way it had been implemented wasn't actually the way in which the randomised control trial had been set out. For example, the use of scripts, the use of 3 times callbacks as opposed to 1 time callback if somebody doesn't answer. So I raised that directly with Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist, and that has been subsequently raised as well in a sort of, it's being dealt with the Deputy Commissioner and others, and I believe that steps they have now been taken to remedy that. And then that links into other work that the Met is doing, and which I very, very much welcome under the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, to set up a sort of assurance unit to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen, so that you do have the sort of the assurance, and that's what an assurance unit would do, but the confidence that initiatives like that, which genuinely do show a lot of promise. I mean, the RC, a randomised control trial, is kind of the gold standard of how you want to do stuff, and I mean, it's showing that level of increase. And when we know TDIU historically tracks lower than the user satisfaction survey for in-person stuff anyway, it's the sort of stuff which is a no-brainer, so it's really important that it does get implemented properly, but we have done quite a bit of work on that.
So just to clarify, so you had a randomised
control trial.
Callback.
Randomised control trial, where what would happen was that for a small cohort of things at that time, there had historically not been called back to the individuals who had reported either via telephony or online. They would then get a call back. If there was no response, they would get up to 3 efforts to reach them. There would then be a script which was then used to actually talk about this. This is published, I think, in the Cambridge Journal Criminology, so we can send you stuff. Then when that was implemented, it wasn't implemented in the same way, where it was implemented only with 1 callback and without a script as far as we could see. So we've raised that at very senior levels and understand action's been taken to make sure that that's remedied.
So it seems like you had a good system that was trialled and then not implemented in the way that it was trialled,
right.
And now we're waiting for the implementation of what proved successful in your trial. And so how long will we be waiting for that? Because that sounds like if something...
So it should have been remedied now. We will be monitoring. It's probably a bit late for... Where are we at the moment? We're in May. So the first full quarter of it being remedied will probably be the Q2 figures. But what we're trying to look at, and what we'll try and look at, is whether we see an uplift in the month-on-month figures. I mean, the difficulty with looking in the month-on-month figures as opposed to quarterly figures are you see much more sort of random fluctuations in that because it's a much smaller sort of control total that you're judging it against. But we are going to be looking at that in the hope that we do see some green shoots there.
Okay, I think I'm going to write to you for further information because I'm getting the eye of the chair who clearly wants to move things on. But thank you for that. That's
don't know, my powerful eyes. Just before we move on entirely from Engage, I just want to ask about the information that this committee can have about the progress on the Engage process, because we've not had much in the way of access to papers or briefings on the Engage process. There was a request, I think, which the Mayor previously refused for a quarterly update, and there's been limited information over the last 6 months in the minutes of sort of formal Oversight Board papers. So would it be possible to provide a quarterly informal briefing for the committee following the board meeting, or a quarterly written update from the Deputy Mayor on progress on Engage?
What I was going to say, actually, is that it's all a bit under wraps in a way, because and that's deliberate on the part of HMIC, FRS. The PPOG meetings are closed sessions. They don't discuss publicly the outputs of those. So we just need to be conscious of that when we're considering what information we might share. What do you think might we be able to provide something there?
So I spoke to Helen, obviously, who's the sort of the executive director in charge of the committees, and sort of said we are currently reviewing in ENI what sort of packs we produce, data packs we produce on a monthly and quarterly basis. Very happy to come and speak to you all about what sort of data, what sort of stuff you actually would find useful in that regard, and see how we can tweak whatever we're doing in a way which is most useful to all of you as well.
We're keen to provide that. It's just that we are sort of officially a bit limited in what we can share.
Of course, absolutely understood. I think just that let's explore that possibility and see what information we could have. But I think it would help us with our understanding of the Engage process.
And on other issues, as you know, we're very happy to offer informal briefings or visits or whatever else might be of value to you and your support team to help the scrutiny process.
Thank you very much for that. Now we're going to move on to talk about the turnaround board, and I'm moving to Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. You've already touched on some of this morning and how, I guess, the turnaround plan you described as a roadmap out of Engage. And I think that's quite interesting. And all this is so interconnected, isn't it? Let's be honest. And you're going to have to merge all your processes and oversight and so on to tick all of these things. But the draft turnaround plan we saw, what was your initial thinking on that, your assessment of that, and what feedback, what differences have you asked to see in the final plan?
So, I mean, the first thing to say on the turnaround plan, I think, is that the Met need to get this right. So we're not rushing them to publish it. It's really important that they take the time to respond to the consultation and also to test what the final plan is going to say with Londoners, because, you know, if this lands badly with Londoners, it's not going to drive up trust and confidence, which is exactly what we need to happen. So we're not rushing it. Having said that, there's also obviously a tension with not publishing something fairly soon in response to Casey, because they want to demonstrate progress. So there's a bit of a kind of internal tension there, but we're trying to work through that. So we've, as Kenny's alluded to, we've hosted a number of sessions with them on their latest thinking regarding changes in the turnaround plan, and there are a number of kind of areas that we think need strengthening. So on a sort of general level, they need to be clear about how each of the Casey recommendations are going to be delivered. And the exercise, the Met have done a massive exercise, and it really is a humongous task to bring together the Casey recommendations with things that are in Casey but are not recommendations, if you see what I mean. So there are quite a lot of things within the Casey report that weren't actually translated into recommendations but are still really important, like over-reliance on overtime, things like freezers, you know, which got a huge amount of attention but weren't actually the subject of a recommendation. Initiative itis, you know, there's a whole bundle of things. So those implicit recommendations, if you like, they've also considered. They have also pulled together 300 other commitments and recommendations from other reviews. DARA reviews, I'm pleased to say, feature amongst those. So do recommendations from the Harris Review, from IOPC, from MOPAC, from HMIC, from the Ethics Panel. They've pulled all of that together, and they're trying to pull that all into themes for the plan. So this is a real ocean-boiling exercise. You know, there is a mammoth amount of stuff to bring together. So, but so they need to we think they need to pull out some clear deliverables from all of that. They need to have clarity on what success is going to look like. We want a clear focus on culture, cultural reform, and exactly how they intend. We've touched on culture, but, you know, we want some granularity about how cultural reform is going to be achieved. There are clearly the issues around institutional discrimination, which is closely linked to cultural reform, but we need the plan to explicitly set out how it intends to tackle those. We want clarity on leadership training, on women and children, the proposed children strategy. I think there's a proposal in there for a stop and search charter. And more detail on how they're going to bring Londoners more closely into the development and the implementation of the plan. So those are some of the areas, and some of those I think chime with the areas that the committee has also written to the Met about. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Well, that's huge.
Yeah, it is.
I presume the panel report's recommendations have also been brought in.
Yeah.
And counter corruption.
Yes.
I think the issue I have is that And Louise Casey mentions this in her report, that the Met are very good at, OK, we do a plan in response to this, because that's that's easy, isn't it? It's action orientated. This process, we need to change this, we need to put another person in here, we do this, and then we've ticked the box and delivered it. But how do you get that genuine change in approach and the culture? And I don't think the leadership have got that yet. I don't think anyone has the right answer to that. Are you pushing, you said about getting granularity and so on in there around culture, is that one of the main concerns you've got? Because they can do a big tick box and grid and, you know, your plan to deliver that, but actually that's still not going to change the Met.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly wants to come in, but culture is absolutely front and centre. And I think the other thing we need to remember is that Casey identified optimism bias as being an issue within the Met. So, you know, we've got to check it all the time. You know, are you being over optimistic? Is this realistic? Actually, how is that going to be delivered? Because we don't want to set them up to fail again.
No.
That is the challenge. Did you want to come in?
So all I was going to say is that, like, the approach that the Met have taken to this as a whole, of bringing together all of the recommendations, trying to look at that together, trying to look at it then as what are the themes which run through each of that and bring out. This may not be much of an endorsement, but I personally think that's the right way of going about it.
Yeah.
When we then
but it's very process, that's my
so
thing.
it isn't, because their process previously would have been to take each of those individually, do some little initiative which would mean they could tick stuff off and then it would go away, whereas at the moment actually they're not then looking at they will look at this, but like there might be a group of say 10 or 15 HMICFRS recommendations, and actually if you look at the underlying cause of it, it's not that like this or that or this bit didn't work, it's actually that supervisory ratios as a whole just were wrong. So that's what they'll try and fix, and then they'll have the sort of sub thing. So that is a very different way of them thinking about it, to be fair. I think on the specifics of the culture point, I think what I would say is, one, that culture can't just be seen as a standalone element of the plan. Culture is something which has to infuse every single bit of it, and I think and run through it all. I think the trick for the Met will be, it talks about the Met values in the turnaround plan. They've obviously been reviewing all of them. It's how do you get those values to genuinely be embedded throughout the Met in the way that they run things, and what are the steps that they can take to do that without it becoming sort of initiativitis, or without, and that's what we have said to the Met that we want to see. And I think, to be fair, that's what the Met want to see, but it's a very difficult thing to actually do when you speak to them. But that's kind of where we're at. I mean, I think they are going about it the right way. I do think that how you infuse that culture throughout everything and how it comes out in the values can be seen in each one of the sections of the plan, and how that then underpins delivery and how that underpins the way that the Met runs itself is really key to how the cultural change actually happens.
So this turnaround plan is the final one is going to look quite different in some ways to the sort of high-level-ish document that they put out, inevitably.
I mean, that's a question for the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner, but I would expect that I think there will be substantial changes, because they've gone out and done a lot of engagement. They've had a lot of feedback. They've had the Casey report in the interim. I don't think it can or will look the same.
And then your police and crime plan, I know you touched on that earlier, that will therefore then need to be revisited presumably at some point, presumably after next May.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's fine. That's all clear. So you haven't got a time scale for this turnaround plan, but...
Well, I mean, there is a broad timescale. The Met, I would say I mean, I know that Sir Mark Rowley is keen to demonstrate progress, and of course he will have been in post by a year by September. So it is his ambition, not wanting to speak to him, but I don't think he would mind me saying that it is his ambition to get the revised plan out before the summer recess, if you like. But let's...
Yeah, that's kind of what they're working to.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. And then the turnaround board itself, and it's looking at a structure here.
Yeah.
Established to challenge the draft turnaround plan. Presumably, you've been having workshops, you've been doing all this. How many times has that body actually met? And will it almost, once the plan is published, be superseded by new structures which we're about to get into?
Well, it's a good question about the future of the turnaround board. Let me talk about how often it's met. I think it kicked off in September last year. It's met 5 times, I think, since then. We had a so-called extraordinary meeting, as in it wasn't in the normal course of meetings, last week, specifically to allow the board to look at where the turnaround plan has got to, and the response to that. So I know that Sir Mark is keen for the turnaround board to continue its existence after the London Policing Board is set up. I think, and I'm candid with him about this, I think we will have to think whether that makes sense and how the two dock together as part of the broader future governance framework.
Yeah.
I absolutely understand why Mark wants to have the turnaround board now. It has value. I get that. It's just, there's a lot of the same people at the same meetings, and, you know, will it survive contact with the new reality? I don't know.
Yeah. Right, we'll come on to the board. Someone else is going to ask that, and then I'm going to come back in because I want to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Pigeon. Assemblymember Devonish, you're going to ask a question about the London Policing Board.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm the cheese in the sandwich here. So, good morning.
Good morning.
When do we expect the London Policing Board to be established, and who specifically will sit on the board, please?
Well, you may have seen that yesterday we launched the recruitment campaign for the London Policing Board was launched, which is perhaps something else we can touch on because it's an area that we're looking for your support on. We have now got to go through the process of appointing or, identifying and then appointing the members. We will then need to do due diligence on those members. Those members will then need to be vetted because, of course, they will be they will have access to information about the Met. That is going to take time, but our ambition is for the London Policing Board to be established, the first meeting to take place in the autumn.
Thank you. So I will pick up A.M. Bailey's, I thought, excellent point, because this board is so important. How is the board going to both bond and be a diverse range of experts reflective of the diverse population and experiences? And how's it really going to make you make the change that we all know needs to be made? And I do accept that it's difficult to say what the future's going to be, but it's the biggest question we've got, really.
Well, one of the ways that it will demonstrate change is that it will be held in public. So it will provide greater transparency for Londoners of the oversight of the Met. So I alluded earlier to the fact that the consultation on the PCP demonstrated that Londoners don't understand how oversight is discharged. This board will be broadly but not precisely modelled on the TfL board. There are different statutory frameworks, so it won't be exactly the same, but it will be the same in the sense that it will be in public, so people will be able to see the system in action, if you like. In terms
I just pick you up on that, because you said, because you've slightly contradicted yourself there, because I'm sad enough, I actually watch TfL board meetings, and actually parts of them are public, but a lot of it, frankly, the vast majority of it isn't. Literally, I'm sure Caroline's, she's nerdish like me, she watches them as well. The reality is, like 90% of the meetings are not public. So would you like to reflect on that answer?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a fair point, because there may be aspects of the discussions that it would not be appropriate to ventilate in public. But the principle is that the board will provide more transparency for Londoners, and making as much of it public as it is reasonable to do so will contribute to that. But I want to be frank with the committee. We are in the foothills of designing the London Policing Board and understanding exactly how it is going to operate. So it may be, we will have more to say about this in due course when it is more developed.
Okay, one final question before I ask that. I just wanted to say, you're saying autumn. Bearing in mind it's now May, are you really saying autumn?
I am saying autumn, subject to the constraints that I have described. So, I mean, vetting, for example, takes quite a long time, even if we can prioritise these members. And of course, understandably, the Met are prioritising officers because they've also got separate challenges in relation to officer recruitment. So I just can't give a guarantee, but that is very much what we are aiming for, because we need to get this thing up and running so we can demonstrate progress and effective oversight. And I didn't answer your question about the diversity of the board members, and this is actually really important. So can we just,
yes,
do you mind if we pause on that for a moment?
Please.
So, I mean, it's obviously really, really critical that the board reflects that it looks like London, basically, and it reflects the diversity of our communities. We need to get the right people applying. We have appointed a executive search company who, Gayton B. Sanderson, whose website the details are on. They have a good track record in attracting diverse candidates. They did a good job for us on the external reference group, which is one of the reasons that we have appointed them. We are using multiple channels to attract a diverse range of candidates. So, as well as the Guardian and Sunday Times, we'll also be advertising in the Municipal Journal. We'll be having a high-impact campaign on social media, including LinkedIn. We particularly want to attract people from the groups who are the Casey Review identified as the communities that were being failed. So women, LGBTQ+, who are a cohort that we are particularly concerned about because trust and confidence in that cohort is showing a decline from that cohort, showing a decline, not in that cohort, sorry. Black communities, deaf and disabled, young people. So we've got to use all the attraction strategy that we can to get that diverse membership. Now, I sent out a load of letters yesterday. Sophie has also written to a wide range of stakeholders, and I have written to the chair, and I'm sure she will be sharing that letter as appropriate with Assembly members. So we would really welcome your help in encouraging applicants. So anything that you can do, because obviously we all have our own address books, but you know the power of that is greatly enhanced the more people that we can reach out to help promote that these opportunities are available.
I'd suggest a video from Mr. Carnell, the Deputy Mayor, on that. You know, in the media, if you want to do that. I don't disagree totally. My final question, actually, though, I'll probably ask you to write to me because it's a fairly self-evident question. You'll want to reflect on it, which is what issues should the London Policing Board focus on, but perhaps rather than go over all the issues we all know, you could just write to the committee on that. And my final plea to you, and I'll be quiet, let Caroline take over, is please not the same individuals we always appoint, not the same suspects.
Totally agree. We want people to apply who don't normally want to talk to the police. Those are the people that we need. So we don't want the usual suspects, which is why I'm appealing to you in terms of can you provide us with what support you can in terms of suitable members. And just on the terms of reference, I'll write to you about that. We have got some draft terms of reference, but they'll be agreed at the first meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think all members can help by sort of pushing around messages about recruitment to the board. Using our social media or actually reaching out to
LinkedIn
people.
is apparently a really, really good mechanism.
For that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's useful. Now I gather Assemblymember Bailey wants to come in very briefly, but Assemblymember Bailey, can I actually bring you in at the end of this section when Assemblymember Pigeon has finished her questioning?
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a very interesting discussion, but what is the purpose of this new London Policing Board, and therefore what sort of people are you actually wanting to be on it? Because it seems to me you're saying all things to all people. And is the purpose of this to have real experts who've worked in industry and whatever, who can bring that forensic challenge that you need to hold the Met to delivering what they need to? Or is it that you want to have representatives of London's diverse communities who don't normally want to talk to the police, who don't whatever, which seems to me more about community engagement and trying to build trust and confidence? And even in my answer, when I questioned, and I know you'll be aware because you monitor Mayor's question time, I talked to the Mayor about the policing board last week, and if you look at some of the things he was saying to me, convening a range of experts reflective of the population, it just felt a forum for Londoners. It felt a bit muddled as to what the purpose is. Is this a board where you expect experienced non-executives who've worked in different sectors but can bring that, someone who's got an expertise in cultural change, who can really hold the Met to that, someone who has got other expertise in digital systems? Is that what you're trying to make up, that sort of board? Or is it ticking boxes so you've got people who are going to help with the trust and confidence aspect? Because it seems to me that almost you want a sharp board forensically holding the Met to account, and then separately, which is much more like the TfL board, and then separately looking again at all your consultative and engagement mechanisms which would feed into that.
No, go on.
Why don't you go first, Diana,
Well,
and then
yeah,
Kenny?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. And I think we also need to kind of properly define exactly, what, as I say, what the terms of the reference of the board will be. But we're looking at a high level to it to kind of hold the Met to account for implementing the turnaround plan, which you don't necessarily need specialist expertise in finance or technology or whatever it might be for. So we also welcome lived experience. That's a really, really important part of this. But there will be some people that we will need to provide expert advice to help kind of drive real and sustainable improvements. So it's a bit of a both a mix.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that. You said earlier 9 people. Can I just come in, Kenny, and then I really want to hear from you on this. But you said you're going to appoint 9 people.
Yeah.
But you've talked earlier, digital. That's a huge area. You haven't got the expertise.
I was talking about that in respect of MOPAC.
I know,
actually.
but in terms of this board, though, a lot of it will be digital systems and changing processes. Having someone who's got expertise in that probably would add a huge amount of value to this board and understanding and the challenge. If you look at TfL's board, and I've seen that change over decades, the sort of people on it, what they bring to it is really sharp interventions. I sometimes listen to the meetings and think, wow, that absolutely spot on, bringing from different sectors, but being able to identify those issues. And of course lived experience is really important, but I'm wondering whether you are confusing and could end up with a confused board if you're looking at more the community engagement and that side alongside that level of really sharp forensic scrutiny that's going to turn the Met around and support you in that.
It's a fair point.
And so I think so it's a point which I have considered, we have considered. And what I would say in response is, one, I think to help the Mayor discharge his oversight functions in this, we clearly absolutely need the expertise. That is sort of beyond doubt in a range of sort of different areas, whether you're talking finance, whether you're talking people who have experience of law enforcement, people who know about procurement, people who know about, all sorts of areas. Cultural change is an absolute vital one. What I wouldn't want to do is fish in a very small pool and then steal people from the Met's Director of Culture and Change, but absolutely all of that sort of stuff. I would say an experience of the ERG, I don't think that by saying that we want and it's not a tick box exercise here, because there's so many diverse communities in London that you couldn't have a board of about 1,000 people and you wouldn't get all of London's communities. There's not sort of one big monolithic black community. There's not like X, Y or Z. It doesn't sort of work like that, as you'll be very well aware. So, but I do think that it's not mutually exclusive, that you can have a board of experts and a board which is actually represents London and people who do have lived experience. If you look at the chair of our ERG, he is somebody who has actually had experience himself, grew up in Brixton, I believe, etc. Is a very talented professional individual, but has had lived experience with the police. So these two things are in no way mutually exclusive. The other thing I would say is, it is very important. When we spoke to Seb Dance and Heidi Alexander about the Transport Board, what they said was it was really important to get the user voice into that. I think what you are saying and what I totally agree and we've talked to the team about is we need to find a mechanism to get community voice into the board and make sure that that is heard and that the people understand, because that is the genuine voice of Londoners, and that's who you're trying to impact with this. That's who we're trying to improve the service which the Metropolitan Police provides for, or that we provide in MOPAC through commission services. So I hope that's what we're trying to achieve with it. That's how we're going about it. That's why we're having to review everything which sits underneath the board and think about our community engagement mechanisms as well, for how do we get the voice of Londoners in it. Because it's one thing to sort of say, well, we run a brilliant survey of 19,200 Londoners, okay, but that gives us a lot of sort of high level sort of data. We also need to go out and speak to people, work out what are the papers which are going to the board, how do we get community views and those sort of things. So that we are beginning that process, but I hope that does provide a bit more of an answer to your question there.
Yeah. So I think I agree it's not mutually exclusive, and I wasn't trying to say that, but equally I just think you've got to be clear exactly what you're after here. And I just read all this and feel it's trying to do lots of different things. So alongside this, you're going to have this board, hopefully sharp, focused and whatever. How is that going to strengthen the oversight that you already have of the Met? How does this fit into your structures? So are you going to review that?
Absolutely.
And then, alongside that, you have then got the whole issue of community engagement and input that you were just discussing that I mentioned. And, you know, when I look at, you know, the Met has all these IAGs, it has other community fora, there's all the, you know, borough stuff. Is that part of this? Because that seems to me that if you've got a proper structure there that can feed in, and you've got this sharp board and whatever, that is where you might...
It's a very good question. So, in answer to your very first question, are we reviewing the substructures and how stuff works? Yes, we are, absolutely. Second question, about the wider community engagement, if I can call it that, rather than scrutiny and how you voice in. The Metropolitan Police have begun something called Op Reset under Temporary Commander Colin Wingrove, who I and my community engagement lead Natasha Plummer meet with frequently. I am planning to be meeting with Assistant Commissioner Barbara Gray and Temporary Commander Wingrove very soon. I would need to check my diary to say exactly when, but so that we can actually set up, and this has been agreed with the Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor, some sort of joint governance over exactly what is happening, because actually we do need to make sure that if MOPAC and the Met are doing something, that we're trying to do it in a sort of joint way which actually works for communities rather than something which works for the Met or works for us. And then we need to make sure that whatever we are doing there, whether that's the formal mechanism, the informal mechanism, that the findings and the learning and the sort of community voice which comes from that is able to be fed in not only to the London Policing Board but into the Met well in advance of that, and on a sort of ongoing basis, so they're able to take the action which is actually needed.
There's also a point about the interface with the Met's governance as well. So, and they've been doing an internal review. Well, Deloitte have been doing an internal review of their governance, which I believe is just coming to fruition, which we will also need to take into account, and that will include whether the continuation or not of the turnaround board and what is the future of the management board and all their other bits and pieces. So it's quite a jigsaw.
It is, and it's all in a sort of state of flux at the moment, but I think being able to focus this down, and I mean, for me, I want to visualise. I want the organogram so I can understand.
Yes,
this is what this is responsible for. This is how the community, as it were, feeds in, and also then how does this all fit with our committee and what our role is, and understanding how the new policing board and others might interact with the assembly, and understanding what information will be public, I think will help, because we're all on a road, because ultimately we all want to turn the Met Police around. So,
and very happy to provide that once we have it. I mean, as you say, things are at stage of review, call it flux, call it review, and there is a bit of, we have to do this work and get through it. Obviously we will need in advance of autumn to have concluded said work, and as soon as we do have that, I'm very, very happy not only to share it with you, but to come and talk through how we actually foresee it working, how all the interactions work, equally what data there will be from there, how we can share that with you, whether it's informal briefings with interested members or whether it's with the Secretariat. Very, very happy to do all of that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the interaction with the work of the Assembly, I'm not too worried about there being a conflict there, because obviously you have a statutory function to hold MOPAC to account, and that is and the Met, that isn't going to change. So, but you know, we need to work all of this through, and we're all grasping for that schematic that you describe.
Yes, I'm sure.
So I hope we will be able to share that before too long.
And then just finally from me, in terms of the metrics, what I pushed the Mayor on last week, how are you going to measure the effectiveness of this board? How do we know what success looks like? Yes, okay, the Met coming out of engage process and so on is an obvious one, but actually making sure that's built in so that we can measure that as well.
We're building a new performance.
I think I can't remember who I think it was Assemblymember Duval I spoke to about this earlier. We are currently working with the Met My Performance team and their performance team, which sits under DSC Alexis Boone, to actually look at how we can come up with a joint sort of performance framework which would actually sit for the board. And obviously Dame Louise Casey gave us some of the measures which she would like to use in terms of how she would be measuring reform and what success is, but we also need the day-to-day, what's the finance, what's all of that sort of stuff. So that's what we are doing. That will be transparent. That will be something which will be produced for each of the boards. I mean, that's not agreed, but I think it's a no-brainer. So you should be able to see all of that.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Assemblymember Bailey, I think you had a brief question to pick up on the diversity of the board, but please be mindful of time.
Two small points. How will you ensure the diversity of the board? Because it's very easy to tick the box. Take Susan and I, we look completely different. She's a woman, I'm a man, black, white, etc. We feel exactly the same on most things concerning policing. So how will you make sure that the board isn't lopsided in a community sense or a political sense?
Well, we will do that through the way that we select the candidates and the way that we interview the candidates, so that we've got a broad range of lived experience and expertise and not too much duplication between the members, because with only 9 members, you know, we need to get the maximum value out of each individual member. So that is something that we will work through as part of the appointment process.
And the other question is, a board is not community engagement. I sit very firmly with Assemblymember Pidgeon's view. 9 people are going to have a very hard time representing communities. So how are you going to ask them to do that? And should you even ask them to do that? I think is something that you might need to work through.
Yeah, I mean, and Kenny has described how we're doing separate work on reviewing community engagement and scrutiny. So we need to bring those two things together and think about what the implications are of that for the board. But we do not see the London Policing Board as replacing community engagement. It is a different thing.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm now going to bring in Assemblymember Hall, who will be questioning you on oversight of leadership and management capability at the Met.
Okay, before I do that, because those questions won't take very long, we've covered a lot. I just want to say I completely echo Assemblymember Pidgeon's comment. I do think if you've only got 9 people, if they can have the expertise and then keep the community stuff quite separate, because we've got to be very careful here. The police have got to be allowed to start doing their proper jobs. And if we send them off on so many diversionary things, welcome as they are, we've got to allow them to get on with policing our streets, which are sadly getting worse and worse. And if it's right that we have community engagement, but it's also right that if there's a board, there's the expertise on that board to assist them. Community stuff put separately, but we cannot have board after board after groups after groups. The police have got to be allowed to really start policing our streets, and I'll just leave it at that, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. We've got to concentrate on what they're supposed to be doing out there. You've touched on a lot of this, so I'll just skim the questions, and if there's anything different, then perhaps you'll help. Baroness Casey found the Met has no workforce plan nor strategic assessment of the needs and the skills of the organisation. Do you agree with this? Which I think you do, because we've covered that. And how is that being addressed? Now, I know you've addressed some of that, so is there anything else you want to say on that subject?
I mean, I think that Sir Mark Rowley has acknowledged the need for the Met to do a lot of work on understanding demand and therefore understanding where they should be putting resources in order to respond to that demand. He also described the work that's being done around, if you like, the missing 8,000 officers and how they can be kind of deployed. But there are some real fundamental issues which hamper the Met's ability to produce a workforce plan. The first being the kind of a complete lack of accurate data and poor systems. So, you know, their payroll system doesn't link to the system of how they actually decide to deploy officers, which is called CARMS. So they don't actually know exactly how many people they've got where. So there is a real systems issue. This comes back to my point about technology in support of reform. So
Diana, that is really serious.
No, I know it is. I recognise.
You've been overseeing all this. That is absolutely atrocious.
Yes, and it's something that we have been raising with the Met's Chief People and Resources Officer and with HR. But as we know, and I've touched on this already, there was a lot of abstraction of particular skills as a result of austerity, and the Met deciding to focus on the deployment of police officers, which means that certain expertise, like HR business partners, used to be embedded in BCUs and therefore had a much better grip on, you know, what people were there. When that was pulled centrally, that expertise was removed. So that's one of the things that we've been very much encouraging them to look at. And in fact, I think the Met are now going to pilot putting HR business partners back into a number of BCUs. Because this is, you know, if we're going to get the best ever neighbourhood policing, it's absolutely essential that the Met understands what officers they've got and what the demands are that they need to respond to and how they can be deployed. We absolutely accept that is a priority.
Before BCUs, which I think everybody knows just how much I love BCUs, before then, was the HR function within each borough, or was it centralised?
It was in each borough, is my understanding.
So there was no difference in terms of the links between PSOP and CARMS, but there was HR, sort of what you might call business partners and functions which were embedded there to help, which was then stripped out as part of the money-saving exercise, if I can call it that. Yeah. Rather, I suspect that would have happened even if it had stayed. I mean, you can never prove a counterfactual, but I think that was a money-saving thing which would have been centralised anyway, even if it had stayed as borough command units rather than basic command units.
Okay, I mean, if you don't know who you've got, where they are, I mean, you can't run a business like that.
I think the Commissioner has articulated that to the committee before, and the priority that he's placing on this. And I just to reiterate what I said earlier about how we have been encouraging them to identify good practice in other organisations like the Army. This is one of the kind of external expertise areas.
And do you think they're listening to that?
Yes, I do.
And so when will we see something coming from that?
Imminently, I hope. We are. I can't put a date on that. But I mean, I would suggest that's something you talk to the Commissioner about.
Well, we certainly will. Prior to the Casey review, did MOPAC ever raise concerns over these issues in the Finance, People and Change Oversight Board?
Yes, we did. I mean, I haven't got specific details of when and where, but I can probably provide you with details of when it was raised at oversight boards over time.
That would be helpful, and then perhaps if you could also add what action was taken after you'd brought it up, because it's the follow through, isn't it? If you've brought things up, that's good, but if you haven't followed through to make sure that they've dealt with it.
Well, I mean, we have been. I mean, we have MOPAC as a staff member that sits on the People and Learning Board, so we have been monitoring progress. But as I say, there are these kind of fundamental impediments to the Met actually getting an effective workforce plan in place, and it's that they need to tackle, and they are doing.
Okay, I think you've answered the other questions, so I won't. For ease of time, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Hall. Sorry. And now we move to Assembly Member Ahmad, who is going to be looking at local accountability and oversight structures.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Oh, I think we're still morning, are we?
Just.
No,
we're not actually.
No, we're not. Good afternoon. Before I ask my questions, Luchford, you were talking earlier about green shoots, and I think the point really does need to be made, and you did allude to this, that these issues, as we know with Casey, have been there since Scarman. I was very involved with the Stephen Lawrence campaign and then with what happened with Macpherson afterwards, and I really have an issue with the green shoots way of looking at this, because I think we should be way beyond that now, and I would like that acknowledgement from you that it cannot be about green shoots at the moment. It's got to be far more than that. So I would like that from you, and I'd like, if you could just comment on that right now. But I would like to also move on to the questions that I want to ask you about neighbourhood policing before the Chair throws something at me.
Really, that's scary.
I mean, I think we absolutely do acknowledge that that these are long-standing problems. But as I said earlier, the Casey review identified that the core problem was the defensiveness of the Met and their culture and their refusal to share information with us to make the kind of oversight function more effective. And when I talk about green shoots, I think I am I'm in the place that Baroness Casey described of us having a reset now. We acknowledge that these problems have existed in the past, and obviously we've all been reflecting on our own part in that. I mean, I would not be doing my job properly if I hadn't questioned, whether what part MOPAC has played in that. And we have done internal reflection, which is why we have made changes. But I do think it's about moving forward now, resetting, and that's why I refer to green shoots, because I'm alluding to what I perceive as a genuine change in attitude and intention, which is being demonstrated by the leadership of the Met now, and which of course we welcome. And I would like us to be looking forward. We cannot forget the history, because it is there, and it is so fundamental, and it has contributed to the situation that we are now in. But I would like us to move forward in a kind of spirit of collaboration. So that is why I'm referring to green shoots. I definitely don't think all the problems are solved, and I've been candid that it is going to take time to do that. But we are 100% committed to it, and so is the whole organisation.
Thank you for clarifying and acknowledging that. That's really helpful. So moving on to accountability locally and oversight structures. My first question, how will MOPAC approach its review of the BCU structures, and has the scope, terms of reference and timescale for this now been agreed, given that Casey was very critical of the BCU structure?
So perhaps I can just make a point of clarification, which is that we are not conducting a review of the BCU structure, and we haven't committed to doing that at any point. What we did commit to was in the police and crime plan was to bring together the Met and partner organisations to kind of improve mutual understanding. We are not reviewing the structure, and in fact, Baroness Casey didn't call for a review of the BCU structure. And again, candidly, I rarely think that a structural solution is the answer to a cultural problem. I have worked in Whitehall for many years and seen many machinery of government changes, and I'm yet to be convinced that any of them was particularly effective in changing culture or driving delivery. So we're not reviewing the BCU structure, but we are doing what we can to improve relations between the Met and local areas. That's what the focus is on.
Okay, thank you. The Casey review paints a picture of BCUs that are under-resourced, overworked in comparison to more specialist units. How aware of this was MOPAC before the Casey review, and how are you scrutinising how the Met allocates its staffing and resources post-Casey?
Well, I think we've touched on some of that when we were talking earlier about the workforce plan, because at the moment there isn't a systematic workforce plan that enables that, really. But I mean, I think there is, and we recognise that there is a genuine problem with frontline policing, in that more officers are attracted to those specialist units than they are to working on the front line. And until there is a culture that helps officers to see that as a career move, then we are going to be struggling, and that is one of the big cultural shifts that I think the leadership of the Met needs to tackle, because it is an issue. They want to build the strongest ever neighbourhood policing. They need people to want to do those jobs, and more critically, to stay in those jobs. Because one of the things that we hear from partners is about lack of continuity within the boroughs. Lack of continuity. People are moving on all the time, so they don't get to understand the local area and the community's priorities. And even if they do, then as soon as they're dealing with it, they then get shifted to something else. And I think that is a real issue, that sort of longevity in postings would go a long way to addressing that.
I met with the Deputy Commissioner last week and very specifically spoke about neighbourhood policing and raised every single one of the issues that you have just listed there, and others as well. And her responses, were very clear and very much along the lines of what you've just outlined. What are you going to do to make sure all of those things happen? How are we going to have a structure where people are going to stay in the job, that culturally that this is not seen as a not brilliant career move, that actually officers want to become part of the neighbourhood team, because they see that as something really effective and good for their careers? How are you going to make that happen through your oversight?
Well, I think building relations between the borough leaders and the BCUs is one way to do that. And we have been we now have specific meeting before the London Crime Reduction Board, where we bring together the borough leaders with the Met, so that they can kind of hear direct from them and support that interaction. There has been a broad welcome for the Met's introduction of a superintendent in every borough, so not in every BCU, but in every borough. And that is something that that was an initiative of Mark's, but that is something that we strongly support, and we hope that will kind of help to improve joint working. The other thing that we are doing is MOPAC is specifically encouraging the Commissioner himself to have more direct involvement with councillors and leaders. And he's doing that, I'm pleased to say. In response to that, in June, he's going to be meeting with London councils. He's doing more meeting of local councillors when he's actually visiting BCU, so not just kind of visiting the officers. But, you know, he's been in Lambeth and Southwark recently, and I think he's done that there. So we are encouraging the Met in that way. Because, sorry, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I was just going to add, there's a few other, probably more boring, but equally sort of fundamental ways in which this can actually be done. The first is use of the budget. So actually, priority-based budgeting. If your frontline policing is your priority, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. You would expect to see that used that way, and equally the way in which the Mayor uses the budget. So we have put, I think it's 26.7, don't quote me, million into 500 PCSOs. PCSOs we know are abstracted a lot less. We know generally tend to be more diverse. We know tend to come more from the communities where they work. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done there. The second way is when we look at performance measures and how we develop a performance matrix, whether it's at the top level or at a level below, which maybe isn't going to end up at LPB, but you can measure metrics and actually show that those are the metrics you're going to measure, which drive the behaviours that you want. You need to be careful that you don't come up with perverse sort of incentives or perverse consequences, but you can look at abstraction rates from DWOs. So where do they take aid from? Do they take aid from the specialist teams at the same level they take aid from your frontline officers? How do they go about what they're prioritising when it comes to their promotion boards, etc. So there's quite a lot of, I mean, not exactly headline grabbing exciting stuff, but stuff that you can actually do in that way, which would show a prioritisation and help make sure that did happen.
Thank you for that, and that is actually quite, I know you call it boring, but actually it is the nitty gritty, and it needs to be said. But Mr. Bowie, could you explain how that will help in terms of culture change?
Oh, how that will help in terms of culture change is actually...
And sorry, by culture change, I mean...
The front line being valued, yeah.
Yeah, but making officers think that neighbourhood policing is, something I want to do, it is something that needs to happen, and my promotion prospects there will not be damaged by spending 5 years in a neighbourhood team.
So I can give you my sort of unscientific view of it, which is actually that what tends to be valued by the top of the shop tends to be the stuff that percolates down and which people then want to be involved with, isn't it? So if the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner are saying, I value frontline policing, I value the neighbourhoods, I value how you engage with communities, here's where I'm putting my money, here's where I'm putting my effort, I think that tends to go down when you look at what's happened and other stuff. People talk about, well, actually it was the central teams, it was CT, and that probably was where most of the focus arguably was with could have been perceived to have been with previous leadership. People go there, so I think it's not an overnight thing again, but I do think it's quite a strong signal. It does send thing, and people will want to be where they think the action is. If you look at when Mark and Lynn started and they were setting up the new anti-corruption and abuse command, if you look at the number of applications that they had and the interest that there was in going there, because in part, I suspect, because that was being signalled as the new Commissioner's real priority, that was something where he wanted people to invest, that was something where he wanted to see real change. I think there's some evidence that will change perceptions, which over time will change the culture of what people think going there means for them.
Also, if I may just come in, I also think improving the working environment is really important as well. So that's actually the environment, the physical buildings, and making sure that officers that have kind of repeated patterns of negative behaviours are actually dealt with and extracted, because then people will feel more comfortable in those settings. Because if they're going to work every day and they're being... much of the Casey report was not shocking in the sense of it being a surprise, but what was genuinely shocking were the case studies in there, I thought. I mean, the idea that people are going to work in the 21st century and are on the receiving end of some of the things described in those case studies is frankly unbelievable to me in 21st century London. And I'm not surprised people don't, you know, gay people, black people, women, disabled people, I'm not surprised they don't want to go and work in police stations if that is what they are being subjected to. So, you know, tackling that top down, better supervision, people having confidence that negative behaviours are being rooted out, I think those sort of things will also contribute.
Thank you. How many people have contributed to the review of community police engagement structures, and when do you expect to receive the findings from Black Thrive, and will the Black Thrive report be published or provided to this committee?
I'm going to ask Kenny about that because...
So we currently have a first draft of the final report with us. So I would expect that within the next, I don't know how, it's a first draft of the final report which we're looking at. There's a plan then before it gets finalised for the head of Black Thrive, Jackie Dyer, and the people who've been working on that to come in and meet with the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime and also with Debbie Weeks-Bernard to talk through where they're at, and then that will come in. It will certainly be published for you. I'm just trying to get, or we can certainly provide it, I'm just trying to get exactly what the numbers are. I'm afraid I don't have that particular page open in front of me at the moment, but we can provide that for you. Yeah,
2,278.
There you go, you've beaten me. Yeah, so we'll certainly will, yeah, and it should be, I think, finalised, I'll say by the end of next month, given where we're at in diaries, etc., to try and be conservative. I would hope a little bit sooner than that.
Okay, so relatively soon, hopefully. My final question, and this is about safer neighbourhood boards, which in my own constituency of Lambeth and Southwark have been problematic. What role do you anticipate for safer neighbourhood boards under reformed community police engagement structures?
So that is something we will need to take a look at what Black Thrive say and look at also the joint work that I said we need to do with the Metropolitan Police on this. I mean, one of the early findings which was coming back from Black Thrive, or not from Black Thrive, from communities when we were speaking to them, was actually that they identified much more locally in terms of engagement with the police at a more local level than borough. They sort of looked at it, I mean, I suppose we would call it ward level, but it wasn't quite as specific as that. When you speak to people, it's more their neighbourhood, which isn't quite a ward, but you know what I mean. So I don't want to, at the moment we are continuing to support and work with them. We'll need to look and see what the Met is going to do, because we don't want to duplicate stuff and have the same people doing the same things for different organisations, etc. So I'm afraid there's probably a bit more work to do in that before I can give you a really clear answer. Apologies.
Okay, but there does seem to have been a vacuum, certainly I know in Lambeth and Southwark, where the SMBs have not been functioning now for quite some time, and certainly residents and local people who are involved and very much want the police to succeed and the policing of their communities to be successful are very clear that this is absolutely a deficit at the moment, and it's been a long-term deficit. So how quickly do you think things might be moved along?
So I think Southwark does have a sort of, I mean, defined functioning, but Southwark has a SNB which is in place and working. Lambeth, there's been a particular problem because the person who was the chair, as you'll no doubt be aware, has not been able to be contacted post-COVID, has control of the bank account and all sorts of stuff. So there's a bit of, we are supporting and working with the leads in Lambeth to try and resolve all of that as best we can. It's pretty difficult, if I'm honest with you. I think you probably are aware of the facts of it. I'm happy to pick up outside with you if that's helpful.
Yep, that would be. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you both for attending our meeting this morning and for your answers to our questions. I think we've all learnt an awful lot, and we'll look forward to the extra information that has been promised through the meeting. And I think, you know, that sort of ongoing sharing of information will be extremely welcome, whether that's through informal briefings or sort of sharing of notes and minutes that can be shared from meetings. So can I ask the...
I think,
I'm so sorry.
I've got 1 or 2 points that I wouldn't mind.
I have completely messed up. So, Assemblymember Pigeon, and then Assemblymember Hall, and then Assemblymember Duval.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the BCU model, because I accept it's criticised and the challenges in the Casey report, but Louise Casey herself was clear that's not the focus, to start reorganising that. But is there something around, I think when you talk to borough leaders, and I know these meetings are going ahead, they understand sharing back-up office functions. Of course they do. They're all doing it themselves. But actually something about the frontline policing being directly in for the boroughs rather than the merged BCU. Is there something small around that change that could then help the boroughs have confidence in their borough policing? That actually isn't a big structural change, but a small adjustment that allows them to feel they've got more accountability and perhaps control and say.
So I think there's quite a lot in that, and it's how you bring that to life, isn't it? One of the ways that the Commissioner has started to look at that is the superintendent, etc. I think there's more to be done about when you get down to local levels. Is it just sort of, and this comes out in Casey, it's about the BCU commander actually having full accountability for their patch, being able to really set local priorities and drive all of that, how that's done with communities and those who represent them, including councillors, etc. So I agree, and that is one of the things which I know the Met is actually looking at the moment.
I think that's the way that you might get some movement that gets more confidence without the big structural change.
And I'm not necessarily, I think if you speak to the Met, I'm not necessarily sure they would view the sort of local policing as being at that sort of borough level. I think they would view it at even more localised level than that, in all honesty.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Chair.
I'll just be really quick. I just want to talk about Black Thrive. What expertise does Black Thrive have with the other groups in London, such as women or LGBT people?
So Black Thrive were specifically commissioned to look at engagement with black communities, because this came out of the Mayor's Action Plan for rebuilding trust and confidence following the murder of George Floyd. They have been looking, as they've gone through this, about intersectionality and how all this comes together, and we have and should be able to provide sort of overlay that with all of the work which has now come out from Casey, and the need for us to take account of the fact that it's not just institutional racism but homophobia, misogyny, and some of the ableism which came out in relation to employment tribunals as well.
Okay, I did look at their website. They've got 3 directors, 1 CEO, 3 location directors, just 4 staff. Is it not a little top heavy, to say the least?
Well, I mean, that's probably on the basis of titles, isn't it? But like,
I don't know. I'm asking you.
Yeah.
If you look at it, it just looks.
And they were obviously partnered with another organisation who was leading a lot of the online engagement for them on this. So it has been a sort of joint effort, and we have found that we have made the best progress that we have with them when we've engaged directly at the top of the shop with Jackie Dyer, who's their sort of global director, I believe.
But it's good if it's producing. What sort of funding goes there?
Well, I couldn't give you off the. You mean from us?
Yeah.
I think that the total for this was about 90,000. I would need to write you with the precise number.
Okay.
It will be published in the decision, though.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I go to you, Diana? One of the earlier things we took, I thought I was very much taken by your comment about structural change and what it can deliver or not. But too often, some of the issues that we're facing and some of the issues I think was lost in our conversations is about people. So the performance we've heard at this police committee the previous time I was on about the performance of children's services, and some of those case studies we heard was very the impact, our failure, our collective failure to deliver for young people in London means people get hurt and damaged around that. So somehow in that, one of the structural changes I understand that the MPS is considering is to re-centralise those services to deliver around that. There's an option, I don't know where it is, around that. Is that something where it is, or do we stick to where we are because something is terribly wrong when we're failing? Well, it's not just that. I can name women sexual crimes and rapes of where we're failing consistently. You mentioned earlier on there are signs of improvement, but in those sections we've got to be able to prioritise the performance of these issues for this new board and to get some very fundamental changes around a better service, a better consistency across London around that. Tell us about the thinking of that. But the structural change issue, is that not being considered for children's services? Because I'm not sure what they can do more. We've had some, can I just say, I thought MOPAC was exemplar, and Sophie Linden, on your, when there was engagement from the inspectorate, your weekly meetings, trying to turn it round, trying to get to the root causes of poor performance, because quite frankly, it would have been a service, you know, I'm from local government originally, that would have been taken away from local government if on that failure. We're not in that situation because we're a police service.
Well, as we've said, we have prioritised the protection of children, the protection of women and girls as areas that we want to see strengthened in the turnaround plan. In terms of the Met structure and what they're doing about it, I think what you're alluding to is their approach to specialisation rather than their approach to centralisation. So, I mean, they are looking and they have developed more specialist teams in these areas, and they're also obviously working on their children strategy, which we will be supporting them with, because we in MOPAC are doing work on a child-first approach. So we are bringing those two things together, but I don't think they are centralising those functions. Is that right?
But does that not then lead back to the answer you gave earlier on about on BCUs? If you go to the specialisation model, we start getting the mixed messages. Are they truly? Is the BCU commander truly accountable for what goes on the patch, and the go-to person to what's happening there? Because there will be another line of command that is
so it's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
No, so I think one of the structural changes which they did make was, if you look at how they have set up frontline policing now under DSE Helen Millichap, you have the public protection thematic lead, which is Kevin Southwark, who now sits alongside the 4 quadrant commanders. So it's all been brought into the frontline policing space. Each BCU, as I understand it, will continue to have its own public protection team, which will deal with stuff like mental health, right care, right person, etc. But within each of, and they'll still be responsible and report into the BCU commander. But as I understand it, they are looking at whether, you'll remember that they moved away from the specialisation, the old sort of Sapphire teams, for example, into sort of omnicompetent investigator, and also with your ERPT essentially being, I don't want to, this is very shorthand, but a kind of crime recording instant where they would just go out, record the crime, it would be handed over, an investigator would turn up, and then they tried to move back from that de-skilling to my investigation, which didn't really work either. So this is a kind of now move to re-specialise, like we've got Operation Soteria, which is coming in, which is a direct result of all the work which was done in the rape reviews, which MOPAC did, and I think it's to try and rebuild up the specialisations within those specific areas, which, I mean, I would certainly be very supportive of, because that does go directly to the service that you get locally if you're a victim of violence against women or girls, or if you're requiring an investigation into some sort of incident involving a child.
Okay. One last question, Chair. The elephant in the room, which, you know, I'm a great passionate believer in devolution, but I'm also a pragmatist around this. So in all these plans, how do we take the Home Office with us around those issues? What's the communication lines going back into the Home Office? And of course, we're in the last chance saloon, isn't it? If you read between the lines of where both the Mayor and both the Home Office really come together, I think, about some of the problems we face. So is that your responsibility or is that MPS's responsibility? I'm aware of mixed messages, but where does the Home Office fit into, not signing off plans, but of course, communication about what we're doing to recover the situation? Is that important or is it not? I don't know.
It is important, but I mean, I think that the primary challenge for the Home Office is what are the national implications of the findings in the Casey report? Because obviously in this forum and in London it is the Met that is under the microscope, but a lot of the things that appear in the Casey review also apply to police forces nationally. And, to be fair, the Home Office is picking that up. So in respect of vetting, for example, they've got a national review going on. They're doing a review of the misconduct regulations. And all of those things will impact nationally. So I think that's really more where their accountability and responsibility lies.
But they've got an interest in our wider plans.
Yes, of course they have, and the Commissioner meets regularly with the Home Secretary to discuss progress on the plan. So she will be scrutinising it in that way. So of course they've got a stake in it because she jointly appoints the Commissioner, and because of course the Met has national responsibilities in respect of CT.
I think that's very important in terms of operational policing, but in terms of your role feeding through about the accountability of the police service for London, do you not think you should have a direct line into the Home Office, giving them some reporting lines about the work that we're doing? Not reporting lines, it's too strong.
I was going to say, I don't want anyone else about reporting lines.
You report to the Mayor. But
we talk to the Home Office a lot. I'll give you a slightly granular example, but the Daniel Morgan papers that were found in the safe, which is a whole separate world of pain. I mean, I'm talking directly with the Home Office about that. So on individual issues, we talk, obviously, Kenny and I are both ex-Home Office employees, so we've got very, very good established networks. So we have those conversations. In terms of a more formal oversight, if you like, I'm not sure there are plans to go there.
I mean, I also think it's really important because there's quite a common misunderstanding on the CT policing side of functions about that being a genuinely, I mean, it is national in the way that it operates, but it is also based on a Section 22A agreement. And if you look at how the the legal requirements for oversight of that are based, and you look at Section 3 of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act along with the Policing Protocol of 2011, it's very clear that the primary responsibility for oversight of Section 22 agreements in terms of value for money and effectiveness sits with the PCC, and it's also a networked capability, so it's not that the CT function, I mean, every force essentially has one and they all work in a national way of doing it, but it's not per se that you could just, when people talk about, well, we'll just nationalise the CT function, that wouldn't just affect the Met. If they did that and moved it to NCA, for example, that would affect every force in the country. So that it's slightly different. I mean, there are more standalone stuff if you look at royalty and specialist protection or parliamentary and diplomatic protection, which are slightly separate and weird, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have questions from Assemblymember Bailey and then Assemblymember Devonish.
Thank you, Chair. It's funny that Assemblymember Duval brought up the Home Secretary and the Home Office, because what I'm most focused on is how MOPAC changes going forward in its dealings with the Met. There's been a lot of talk about the culture of the Met, and I'm clear that we should be focused on the culture of MOPAC. And I want to ask a very basic question, because for me it puts down a bit of a line in the sand. But have you, Diana, or the organisation ever written to the Home Secretary about your concerns in the Met historically, not since Casey but before that point? Have you written a plea on behalf of the police? Have you written a complaint on behalf of Londoners to the Home Secretary?
Well, the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor have had multiple interactions with the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister across a range of issues. I can provide you with specific details of what about, but that is the channel of communication.
Look, maybe let me rephrase the question then. Have you, as an organisation or you as an individual, elicited that process? Have you said to the mayor, we need you to say this to the Home Office, and here's the details, and the mayor's decided it's something he should do? The reason I asked the question is because you are the people scrutinising the Met Police. We've had a talk about the lack of levers in here, but that strikes me as a very obvious lever, which demonstrates the culture within your organisation to step out against the police if need be.
Yeah, well, clearly, just if I can just say, as officers, it is our responsibility to give advice to the mayor and make recommendations, and we do that on a regular basis, and that has, resulted or contributed to occasions when he has written to the Home Secretary. So I would cite the review of the misconduct regulations as a prime example of that.
But have you directly asked? Is that because the comment you made is that much of the Casey review wasn't a surprise? That's a comment you made, and I think we can all agree with that, which means that these things historically should have been highlighted, championed, pushed forward by MOPAC. So I'm asking the question, have you as an organisation, or either of you two as individuals, made that step, pushed for something to go up to the Home Office, because of course they do have the lever?
Assembly Member Bailey, I think this question's already been answered.
It hasn't been answered, Chair.
I think it was, because
no, I haven't heard the answer.
In terms of the appropriate channels for making those representations from MOPAC would be through the Deputy Mayor or the Mayor.
I understand
and
that.
Those
Chair,
communications
but
were being made.
I asked the question, has that been elicited by MOPAC? I understand that they have to go through the mayor, I accept that, but I'm asking for the evidence to come from the people, MOPAC, who scrutinised the Met. Have they elicited that? Because again, I'm looking at the culture of MOPAC when it comes to its orientation to the police. Will it take on the Met Police if it feels like it should?
Well, it is our job to provide evidence-based policy advice and to make recommendations and to present options, and it is then for the mayor or the deputy mayor to decide to take a decision about how they want to implement that. We can suggest they write a letter, we can suggest they have a meeting, and we do that. And we have done that multiple times, and that is just core business.
Okay.
Thank you. Now hear from Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you. We were talking earlier about the policing board and you writing to me in terms of the initial agenda. Will there be anything about KPIs in this, you think, so we can actually say, perhaps linking the effectiveness of this board to perhaps the trust and confidence in the Met and maybe other metrics? Will that be
I think
featuring?
Kenny touched on that earlier when he was talking about the performance framework that we're going to be. We're in the foothills of that. Yeah. But we will certainly share that information with you when we can.
And I think it's inconceivable that trust and confidence would not feature one of the key measures on that.
Thank you. And finally, has the mayor or the deputy mayor, Diana, given you any apologies, I can't read with my glasses at this stage. Giving you any specific advice in terms of what she or he is looking for the London Policing Board, please?
Well, I think it's what we've already described, that we want a diversity of lived experience and specialist expertise, and it's what's articulated in the Mayor's forward and on the website, so on the recruitment website. So yes, they have given us direction, but I think we have described the membership that we're trying to attract.
Thank you everyone. And so now I really would like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for your very helpful answers to all our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? And can we also delegate authority to me as chair, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note its work programme and its meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at the annual meeting on the 4th of May? Agreed. And can we note the activity undertaken since our last meeting, namely a visit to the Met's Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre? Thank you. And can I also ask the committee to delegate authority to me as chair, in consultation with party group lead members and the Health Committee chair and group lead members, to write to the Department for Health and Social Care and NHS England regarding additional resources for the London Ambulance Service? Thank you. I'll contact the chair of the Health Committee to discuss this. The next meeting of this committee will be held on Wednesday the 7th of June at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 at City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.